Hello everyone. This is part 3 of the how to install a 17 or 19 inch LCD panel to an Arcade1UP Generation 1 or 2 cabinet and connecting it directly to the Arcade1UP PCB. So this video is assuming that you've already done parts 1 and 2, and if you haven't done those parts yet, please look in the description below and there'll be links to those 2 videos. But as far as if you've already done that, part 3 is going to be continuation, of course, of part 1 and 2. In parts 1 and 2, we essentially got our parts list. We prepped all the items we needed for the assembly of this, the LCD panel to the bezel. So now we're ready to assemble all that and get it back into the Arcade1UP cabinet. So this part 3 is going to have 3 steps. So it's going to be continuation starting with step 5, which is going to be adding the LCD panel to the bezel. Now there's 4 different variations on this mod. You're either going to do a 17-inch horizontal monitor, a 17-inch vertical, 19-inch horizontal, or 19-inch vertical. And in each of those, and how this is going to be set up is if you look in the description, there'll be time indexes of which part of this video you'll have to go to watch what you need. So just look in the description, and when you find what you need, for example, if you're looking for a 17-inch vertical monitor, go in the description and look at the time index and go to that time index to watch that part of the video. And then once it's completed, then look at the time index to go directly to step 6, which is to install it back into the Arcade1UP cabinet. Okay, so each mod is going to have 8 sub-steps to it. Starting from A to H. A is going to be, you're going to glue the wood strips to the back of the bezel. Then B, you're going to line up the stock acrylic Arcade1UP panel or poster board with the LCD monitor. C, you're going to screw the LCD panel to the back of the bezel. D, you're going to then apply friction tape. E, you're going to add the electronic components to the electronic back panel or backboard. F, you're going to attach the electronic back panel to the back of the bezel. G, you're going to apply the stock acrylic Arcade1UP panel or the poster board and new plexiglass to the front of the bezel, and that'll depend on if you're doing a 17-inch or a 19-inch mod. And then finally, you're going to test the LCD panel. And each of these sub-steps will be done for any of the 4 mods that are listed, whether it be 17-inch or 19-inch mod. Now in step 6, we're going to install the bezel back into the Arcade1UP cabinet. So it's going to be the reverse of what we did in a previous step in part 1 when we took it apart. We're going to put it back in, and you're going to take the existing screws that you saved and put everything back together. And then finally in step 7, if you have an LCD controller board, we're going to show you how to move the cables to the LCD controller board so you can hook up a PC or Pi. Now again, this video series is more focused on adding an LCD panel to the stock Arcade1UP PCB. However, if you bought the LCD controller board to get the inverter, and in this case that's what I did and mounted that LCD controller board, it's there in case you decide at some point you want to upgrade to a PC or a Pi. And so to use that same monitor so you don't have to get a different monitor, all you have to do is move the cables over to the LCD controller to get that work with a PC or a Pi. And that part of the video is just going to show you how to do that at the end. Even though that's not the focus of this video, I'm going to show you how to do it and watch the PC boot up. So with that being said, we're going to start with, if you're doing a 17-inch horizontal monitor, we're going to continue with that right now. If you're doing the 17-inch vertical, 19-inch horizontal, or 19-inch vertical monitor upgrade, please look in the description to go to the time index where each of those steps start, and then after it's finished, then you'll go directly go into the description again to look at where step 6 begins and go to that time index to begin step 6. Okay, if you've fast forwarded to this part of the video, that means you're doing the 17-inch horizontal mod. So we'll start with substep A, which is gluing the wood strips to the back of the bezel. So the parts you're gonna need for this, you're gonna need a stock Arcade1UP wood bezel. You're gonna need the two 13/4-inch wood strips, and these would have been the ones you cut from step 4, sub-step A. You're gonna need wood glue. You're gonna need 6 ratchet clamps or some regular clamps, and then you're gonna need one utility knife with a fresh blade. Now this utility knife is gonna be used to cut the wood strips if they interfere with where the cabinet brackets on the back of the bezel go, which you should have outlined. And if they go over that outline, you'll have to cut the wood strips a little bit. But in most cases, you won't have to do that. But it's that you may need it just in case you have to do that. You'll also need a sand block or sandpaper to possibly sand down the sides a little bit to get rid of some excess glue, and a pair of needle nose pliers to get rid of any big globs of glue that may have set. And if you don't have needle nose pliers to get those globs of glue, you can probably more likely use your fingers to pick off the globs of glue as well. And finally, you may need some kind of rag to kind of wipe off any excess glue that may seep from the wood strips. Okay, so here's a diagram of the back of the 17-inch horizontal bezel. So what we're going to put the wood strips on the left and the right side of where the hole is, where the monitor goes. So you'll notice that it says there's a rough cut and a clean cut. The clean cut should face toward the monitor hole, and the rough cut should face away from the monitor hole. And also keep in mind, when you place these strips on there, you want the edge of the clean cut and the edge of where the monitor hole is, you want that flush, meaning you don't want it exceeding outward or anything like that, because if you do that, then when you put the monitor in, it's not going to set in cleanly, and then you'll have to sand down the wood strip in order for it to fit. So you just want that, when you line it up, you just want it to be flush with the edge of the hole where the monitor is. Okay, so this is our bezel for the horizontal. So what we're going to do here is we're going to flip it over to the back. As you can see, I had it marked as top front, so we want to make sure we're on the back of the bezel and that the top is facing away from us. So as you can see, we have our marks here where we outlined the cabinet brackets, and as you can see, here's one of our wood strips, and you can see where I have the clean edge going against the monitor edge there, and we're just making sure it doesn't exceed that bracket outline, because if it did, we'd have to cut it, but in this case we don't have to. So again, this is how we're going to place them, and again, we want to place the wood strips on here, and we want it flush with the monitor outline that's cut out here. We don't want it exceeding out. So basically we're going to take our wood glue. So once we got that in place, we're going to flip it over, and we're going to just put a generous amount of wood glue on here. And then once we get that wood glue on there, we'll go ahead and put that on the back of the bezel. So now that we got our glue on there, we're just going to take it, flip it over, and place it on the bezel and kind of press in place, and then just leave it there for a moment, and then we're going to go over and we're going to glue on the second one as well. Okay, so once we got the glue on the second one, we're going to do the same thing again. Clean cut going towards the monitor outline, and then we're just going to take our clamps and we're going to start clamping them down. So essentially what we're going to do here is, starting from the bottom, we're going to put a clamp on the bottom, one in the middle, and one on the top. So again, we're just going to clamp it down, and again, we're making sure that that edge is flush with the monitor cutout, like that. We want to make sure it's flush and not like exceeding out or anything. That's to make sure that when we do put the monitor in here, it's not going to that wood strip isn't going to impede it. So we're going to just go ahead and clamp down, put the rest of the clamps on the wood strips. So putting the final clip on there to hold it in place. it's not a ratcheting clamp. I misplaced my sixth ratcheting clamp, but I'm just using a different clamp, and that's fine. And that's it. We just again just confirm that the edge of the wood strips are flush with the edge of where the monitor cutout is, and then we're just gonna let this sit for 2 hours and come back to it. So just let it wait. Okay, so once about 2 hours have gone by, we can take the clamps off. So we're just going to take all these off here. And once we get all the clamps off, then we're just going to try to remove any excess glue that was on the sides of the strips here. As you can see, there's some residue glue. So we're just going to take our sandpaper block, and we're just going to kind of go over it a little bit just to clean up that excess glue to make it a little smooth. And once you do that, that's it. You've got the strips on there, and now we can move on to the next step. Now that you've added the wood strips to it, now we're going to move on to the sub-step B, which is line up the stock acrylic Arcade1UP bezel. And this is done so that we can make sure that before we screw on the LCD panel to the back of the bezel, the wood bezel, that the acrylic bezel lines up with the screen, and so we don't have to make any other adjustments. So what you're going to need for this sub-step is you're going to need the stock Arcade1UP acrylic bezel, you're going to need your stock Arcade1UP wood bezel, and you're going to need the 17-inch LCD panel with the brackets that you added in step 4, sub-step F. So from this diagram, you can see what we're talking about, lining up the Arcade1UP stock acrylic bezel with the 17-inch horizontal monitor. So on the left, it's without the stock bezel, acrylic bezel. So as you can see where the monitor is, it has like a gray outline around the monitor, and we're going to try to hide that with the stock bezel. The stock bezel should hide all that. So if you look on the right, with the stock acrylic bezel on top of there, if it's lined up with the screw holes, it should cover up the silver part of that outline of the monitor, and that's what we're going for. But even if a little bit of silver does show on the monitor, we'll be covering that up with friction tape. So if just a little bit showing, we'll be covering that up. But for this particular step, we just want to line it up to make sure everything looks right, and it gives us an idea of how to position the LCD panel when we screw it down. Okay, so we're going to put this in the back of the bezel. So if you saw where I was pointing, that's the LVDS port. Just make sure that's pointing away from you when you put this in. That makes sure it's towards the top, because if you put it in upside down, of course the screen's going to come up. The display is going to be upside down. So this is what it's going to look like in the front. And basically, what you're going to do is you're going to adjust this. We're going to make sure it fits. And it should fit. And then once we get it all adjusted and everything, then we're going to put the bezel on there and make sure make sure everything lines up. So here I am taking the bezel, and what we're going to do is we're just going to line up the holes on that bezel with the holes on the actual wood bezel there. The acrylic line those holes up, and we're not going to screw it down. We just want to line it up just to get a look, to make sure that everything looks okay. Now again, if any silver showing a little bit, that's okay, because we're going to be covering that silver up with friction tape anyway, black friction tape. But the Arcade1UP stock acrylic bezel is designed to where it should hide all those silver outlines on the monitor. So in this case, that's doing it. So now we can move on to the next sub-step. Okay, so now we're ready to move to sub-step C, which is screw the LCD panel to the back of the bezel. And so what you're going to need for this is you're going to need your stock Arcade1UP wood bezel that has the wood strips on it that we glued in sub-step A. You're going to need your 17-inch LCD panel with brackets that you did in step 4, sub-step F. You're going to need one power drill with a 1/8 inch drill bit, and that's optional. You may be able to get away with just screwing those with a regular Phillips head screwdriver, but if you have the power drill with the bit, that's just to drill the pilot hole so we can put the screws in. And then you're going to need 8 number 6 1/2 inch wood screws, and then you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver, and of course that's to screw in the wood screws. However, if you want to use your power drill to do that, if you have the bit for it, or if you have a power screwdriver, you can use that as well to put the screws in. So this is our representation of the back of the bezel of the 17-inch horizontal bezel. So we're going to put the LCD panel on there, and those brackets should cover the should set on the 2 wood strips that we glued on there. And then what we're going to do on each bracket, on the top and the bottom of each bracket hole, we're going to take our power drill, or you can screw it in, try to screw it in manually, but I use a power drill to do a pilot hole. And we're going to do a pilot hole, and then we're going to screw in our number 6 1/2 inch screws. So we're going to need a total of 8 of them. And the again, the top and the bottom, the middle one we're not going to screw in, just the top and the bottom. So once we get those screwed in, that will secure the monitor in place. And of course, make sure where it says the LVDS port there, make sure that port is pointing away from you in this orientation, because if it's not, it's going to be flipped upside down, and then the image is going to be upside down. So make sure it's pointing up toward away from you. Okay, so we're just going to place the monitor in there, and once we get the monitor in place, as I said, it's resting on those wood strips. So once they're rested on the wood strips there, make sure the LVDS port is pointing away from you. And now we're going to take our number 6 screws here, number 6 1/2 inch screws, and we're going to put those in the screw holes. So we're going to take our power drill, which is with the 1/8 inch bit, and again, we're going to only drill pilot holes in the top and the bottom of each bracket. So again, just take your power drill and just drill the pilot hole. You don't have to go all the way through, just go about halfway through. Just make sure you get through the wood strip and a little bit of the MDF there, and then once we do that, then we can put our screws in. Okay, so once we drill our last pilot hole, we're just going to just wipe off the excess sawdust there, or MDF dust, whatever you want to call it. And then once we do that, then we can screw in our number 6 1/2 inch wood screws. So we're just going to take a handful of them and set them aside, and then we're going to take our screwdriver, Phillips head screwdriver, and just line it up and just screw it down. Now if you have a power screwdriver, or if you want to use a power drill to drill these in, you can. I just like to do it manually. And then repeat that for the other 7 pilot holes that you drilled. Okay, so now when we put the final screw in, that should be it. So once we screw that down, we'll check to make sure, just kind of pick it up and kind of, make sure it's secure, which it looks like it is. Then we're going to flip it over to the front here, and we're just going to make sure that that LCD panel is flush with the top of the wood bezel there. So you just take your fingers and kind of glide them across the edges, and just make sure it's flush, or it's below the monitor outline, because if it's going up above that outline, when you put the acrylic on, it may bend it and it may damage it. So we just want to make sure that it's either flush or a little bit down, and you can kind of look at it from the side too and see what's going on. But once that's done, that's it, and we can move to the next sub-step. Okay, so now we're moving on to sub-step D, which is applying the friction tape. And the friction tape is applied on the perimeter of the front of the LCD monitor that has the silver outline around it. And we just cover up the silver outline so that if there's anything exposed, if the Arcade1UP stock acrylic bezel doesn't really cover up that perimeter, it will show black instead of silver. So what you're going to need for this is you're going to need the stock Arcade1UP wood bezel with the LCD panel attached. You're going to need one roll of friction tape, and you're going to need a utility knife, which is optional. This is to cut the friction tape, but usually friction tape is you can usually just tear it off, but in case you have a hard time tearing it off, you can use the utility knife to cut the friction tape, or you can use a pair of scissors as well. Okay, so here's a diagram of the front of the bezel with the monitor in place. So we can, so as you can see on the left, that's the monitor, and there's an outline around it, which is that silver outline of the monitor. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply friction tape to all four sides so that it's blacked out. And if you look at the after friction tape, you can see where that outline is black now. And this is done again just so that if the bezel or whatever is off a little bit, it's showing black instead of showing that silver. So with that being said, we can proceed to put the friction tape on. Okay, so we got our friction tape, and again we're just going to tape all four of the sides here and cover up the silver, pretty much the silver outline of this monitor. So essentially, again, line it up all the way to the edge of that silver outline, and just make sure not to cover up the monitor part of it, but just kind of line it up. And then once you get lined up, just kind of put it in place, and then tear it off. And once you tear it off, then we're going to repeat the same thing on the other three sides of the monitor. And we put our final strip of friction tape on the last side, and that's it. The friction tape is applied, and we can move on to the next step. Okay, so in the next sub-step, which would be sub-step E, we're going to add electronic components to the electronic backboard. Now this is the, and the parts you're going to need are the following. You're going to need your 15.5-inch electronic back panel or board that you cut in step 4, sub-step B. You're going to need a power drill with a 1/8-inch drill bit. You're going to need 8 machine screws from the PCB feed kit that you purchased. You're going to need your inverter board with PCB feed attached. You're going to need your LVDS cable with ground cable attached. You're going to need your Arcade1UP PCB with the metal case with the PCB feed attached, which was also done in step 4, sub-step C. You're going to need the LCD controller board with PCB feet attached, again done in step 4, sub-step C, and the LCD controller board, controller panel with PCB feet attached, which was also done in step 4, sub-step C. Now the last two, the LCD controller board and the LCD controller board control panel, these are optional. If you're actually going to just use the Arcade1UP PCB, you don't need the controller board or the controller board control panel. But in this case, I'm attaching it to there because in case I want to add a PC or a Raspberry Pi later, I have that option, and the board is already there for me to do that. And then finally, you're possibly going to need a jigsaw with a wood blade or a wood saw. And this is possible, and I say possible because this may be needed to cut the wood panel to fit. So before we actually start putting the electronic components on there, we're going to put the wood back panel, the electronic backboard or back panel, onto the back of the LCD panel itself and kind of line it up. And we need to make sure that that panel doesn't interfere with the cabinet brackets that you did an outline of, because if it goes over that outline, we'll have to actually cut the board a little bit to make it fit so it doesn't obstruct those cabinet brackets. But in most cases, you won't have to do that with the 17-inch mod, but we just need to double check it just in case. And you'll also need a Phillips head screwdriver, or you can use your power drill with the appropriate bit, or if you have a power screwdriver, you can use that as well to screw in the screws. And you also need your metallic ruler or your speed square or the whatever ruler that you bought. And then finally, you're going to need your black Sharpie. Okay, so this is the electronic backboard for the 17-inch horizontal mod or for the LCD panel. And this is the board that we cut back in step 4 when we were preparing parts for assembly. Uh, so as you can see, you can put the electronic components on here any way that you want to, but this is the best way I find to do it. So going from left to right, we're going to put the inverter board, then the Arcade1UP PCB, then the LCD controller board, and then above the LCD controller board we'll put the LCD controller board control panel. Now you'll also notice on the left and the right we have a 1/2-inch border. That 1/2-inch border is there because we have to screw this into the back of the wood bezel on the Arcade1UP. So we need some clearance for that, so that's why we have that 1/2-inch border there. So none of the electronic components should exceed that border. But with all that being said, we can go ahead and start putting the components on the backboard. So before we start putting the electronic components on the backboard, we want to kind of get an idea where we're going to position this board on the back of it, and we're going to do that so that we're making sure we're not impeding the cabinet brackets there on the left and right that we have outlined, because if it impedes the brackets then we may have to cut a little bit off on this board. But as you can see, where we're going to place this, I placed it right where those brackets are and lined up, and it's not impeding the cabinet brackets, so we don't have to do any more cuts to the board. So now we can start adding the electronic components to the board. Okay, so now that we confirmed that everything's going to fit right, we're just going to draw our border on the left and right side. So from left to right, we're just going to make a mark, a 1/2-inch mark, and then the same thing from right to left, we're just going to make a 1/2-inch mark. And I'm going to do that also on the bottom here. Again, just do a 1/2-inch, make a notch, and over on the left, make a notch as well, measuring from left to right a 1/2-inch. Then we're going to take our speed square, or you can just take a ruler and just line up our notches and draw our line. And again, that's the border that so when we put our electronic components on here, those electronic components aren't going to exceed that border. That's just so we can make sure we can screw the board in place on the bezel. Okay, so now that we got the borders all drawn out, we can start applying the electronic components to the backboard. We're going to start with the inverter board over to the left. Make sure the power cable is pointing to the right, because that's going to plug into the Arcade1UP PCB. So again, we're just lining it up so that, again, it doesn't exceed the border that we created. Now to get this on here, I have to move the feet a little bit to kind of adjust them, so that to make sure that when we drill our pilot hole, that it's going into the wood and it's not like going off the edge or anything like that. And when we move the legs, it may loosen those screws a little bit, so we're just going to just make sure we screw down the screw to make sure it's tight and in place. So once we got that done, we're going to take our power drill with our 1/8-inch drill bit, and in that leg hole we're just going to drill a pilot hole. So we're just going to be careful, and we're just going to drill about halfway through, not a whole lot, just enough. And then once we get that out, then we can take one of our machine screws and put it in there, and then take our screwdriver and start screwing it in place. And then once we got that screwed down in place, then we'll do it on the second screw. Okay, so now that I got the second screw in there, now the inverter board's in place. And now we're going to move on to the putting in the PCB, and we're going to do the same thing with that. Okay, so we've got our panel here, our Arcade1UP PCB, so we're going to start hooking up a few things to it. First thing we're going to do is we're just going to kind of determine where we're going to place everything. So taking that in our LCD controller board, so we're going to turn the legs about 90 degrees. That way it'll give us enough room for that LCD controller. Now again, if you didn't buy the LCD controller board, You don't have to worry about this step. Again, we're just lining it up so that everything will fit properly. And so if you don't have that LCD controller board, then you wouldn't have to worry about doing that. Now we're going to plug up our LVDS cable to the PCB as well. So look at the white dot, which it indicates pin 1, and in this case the orientation of the PCB, pin 1 will be over to the left as well. So we want to make sure that's lined up and plug that in. Then we're going to screw down the ground cable. So we're going to unscrew one of the screws from the Arcade1UP PCB, and then we're just going to screw that into the ground cable. So once you get that screw out, we're just going to thread that into the ground cable screw hole there, and then just take our screwdriver and screw that down and get that ground cable in there nice and tight. And then once we get the ground cable on there, then we're going to also then take the LVDS cable, power cable from the inverter, and plug that into the PCB as well. And this only goes one way, so if don't force it in, it'll only slide in one way. So then once we get that in there, and of course we have the ribbon cable already plugged in, so then we're just going to flip this around, and then we're going to drill our pilot holes so that we can get this screwed down to the backboard. Once we got it lined up here, then we're going to take our power drill with the 1/8 inch bit. We're going to do our first hole, do a pilot hole, and then we're going to take one of our machine screws and then screw it down. And once we get that screwed down, we're going to screw down the other end. And once we get that final screw in there, then our Arcade1UP PCB is in place on the backboard. Now next we're going to put in the LCD controller board if you have that. Now there's 4 feet on here, but we're only going to screw in the back 2. The bottom, the ones in the middle are too hard to get to, so we don't need to screw those in place. We just need to screw in the back PCB feet. So again, we're going to take our power drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit, start a pilot hole, take it out, and then take one of our machine screws and screw that in there, and we're going to repeat that for the other side as well. And we'll get the final screw in place there, and now the LCD control board's in place. Now the final component we're going to screw on is the LCD controller board control panel. Again, we're just going to line that up, drill a pilot hole with our power drill, and then take a machine screw and screw it down, and then we'll repeat that on the other side as well. And then we'll put our final screw in, and that's it. We now have all our components installed on the backboard, and we can install it on the back of the bezel now. Okay, so for sub-step F, we're going to attach the electronic back panel to the back of the bezel. And for this step, you're going to need your 15.5 inch electronic back panel with the electronic components attached. You're going to need your power drill with your 1/8 inch drill bit to drill the pilot holes. You're going to need your 4 number 6 1-inch screws, and then you're going to need your Phillips head screwdriver, or you can use your power drill with the correct bit, or you can use a power screwdriver to screw down the screws. Now after we do this, then we'll also plug in the lamps for the LCD panel, and then we'll also plug in the LVDS cable into the from the Arcade1UP to the LCD panel itself. So this is a diagram of the back of the bezel for the 17-inch horizontal LCD panel. So essentially, we're going to attach the electronic back panel onto the back of the bezel. So as you can see in this diagram, we're going to line it up, and we're going to line it up to the point where the 2 sides of the back panel are on top of the wood strips that we did, and then we're going to screw in 2 number 6 1-inch screws so that it's secure on the back of the bezel. And then once we do that, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to plug in the lamp cables, and we're going to plug in the LVDS cable into the back of the monitor as well. Okay, so now we're going to attach the electronic backboard onto the bezel. So we're going to line that up on the wood strips so to make sure that we can attach it on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to drill 4 holes 2 on the left side, 2 on the right side with our power drill. And we're going to drill the pilot hole so we can screw in those number 6 1-inch screws. Now if you look on the side here, we need to drill enough into to make sure it goes through the backboard, the wood strip, and the actual bezel itself. We don't have to go all the way through. We just have to make sure we drill, but we have to make sure we drill enough to get through all 3 pieces of that material. So again, taking your power drill with your 1/8 inch drill bit, we're just going to keep it straight, and we're just going to drill down in. All right, and then pull out, and then repeat the same thing on the other side. All right, then we're going to take our number 6 1-inch screws. We're going to get 2 of them, and we're just going to put in our put the screw in the pilot hole we did, and we're just going to use our Phillips head screwdriver to screw it down. Again, you can use a power drill if you have a bit for it to screw it down, or you can use an electronic screwdriver. I just generally use a Phillips head screwdriver to screw it down. And then once we get the first one done, we'll do the same thing on the second one. Okay, once we get the second one in, then we're going to repeat the same thing on the other side. We're going to drill our 2 pilot holes, and then we're going to take our we're going to get 2 more number 6 1-inch wood screws, and we are going to screw those in with our Phillips head screwdriver. Okay, once we got that final screw in there, that's it. It is screwed down there, and now we're going to plug in our lamp cables into the inverter board. So just take the 2. In this case, make sure it's plugged in. We got plugged in correctly. With these lamp cables, they just plug in. There's some writing on the top of them that indicates the top. They should only plug in one way anyway, but just plug those into the inverter board. And then once we get that plugged into the inverter board, then we'll go ahead and we'll plug in the LVDS cable into the monitor itself. There's only one way to plug this in, so you pinch the edge there like that. It's got 2 little clips. Clip it, pinch it, and then just plug it in. Now again, it's only going to go in one side, so just keep those clips pinched in, and then just plug it in. You may have to adjust it a little bit to get it in there, but once it's in there, it just pushes in and just secure in place. And then what I do is I kind of just stick the cables underneath the Arcade1UP PCB, but you can clamp them down or do whatever. But that's it. Once we got everything hooked up, the electronic panel's in place, all the cables are plugged up, we can move on to the next sub-step. Okay, so in sub-step F, we're going to apply the Arcade1UP stock acrylic panel back to the wood bezel. So what you're going to need for this, you're going to need, of course, your stock Arcade1UP acrylic panel. You're going to need the 4 screws that held that stock Arcade1UP acrylic panel in place. We're going to reuse those screws, and you should have kept them. And you're going to need your Phillips head screwdriver to screw it down. And just keep in mind when we apply this acrylic back on, when you set this on a table, of course the back panel is going to be on there, so when you lay down the panel, it's not going to be flat on the surface. So if you want it to be flat on the surface while you're applying this, then take off the electronic back panel. In this case, I didn't do that, but if you want it to be flat and you don't want it, to be kind of lopsided, you may want to take that back panel off. Okay, so now we're going to apply the Arcade1UP stock acrylic bezel back on to the actual wood bezel itself to cover up the monitor. In this diagram, if you look on the left there, you'll see that we have the monitor with a black outline, which indicates the friction tape we put on earlier. And if you look on the right, you can see where we have the stock acrylic bezel lined up with the holes on the bezel to screw them in. And we're gonna we need to get those screws that we got from the original Arcade1UP stock acrylic bezel, because we're going to reuse those, and we're going to screw those 4 screws down to hold the acrylic bezel in place. Now you'll notice in the video I didn't have a friction tape on my outline of my monitor. That's fine, I just forgot to do that. But in your case you would have the friction tape there. But we're just taking our screws that we originally took that held the Arcade1UP stock acrylic bezel, and we're just replacing those screws. So I just replaced the top left one, and we're going to do that for the other three as well. And once we put the final screw in there, that's it. It's in place, and everything looks good to go. Just kind of wipe off any dust that you have on there, and that's pretty much it. So now we can move to the final sub step, which is to actually test the monitor before we put it into the Arcade1UP cabinet. Okay, so for the final sub step, which is sub step G, we're going to actually test the LCD panel before we put it back into the Arcade1UP cabinet. This is to make sure that everything works, and if anything goes wrong, we can, troubleshoot it and get everything working before we put it into the cabinet and screw it down, so we don't have to take the whole thing back out again. So what you're going to need for this is you're going to need your Arcade1UP bezel with the LCD panel, which you just already assembled. You're going to need your Arcade1UP control panel for whatever machine PCB that you're using, and you're going to need your Arcade1UP power supply to power it up. And then once we power it up, we're just testing to make sure it comes up and everything functions properly. Okay, so we've got this hooked up. We're just going to test to make sure everything does work. We have it hooked up to the Asteroids control panel. The ribbon cable is connected to that, and we have the power cable plugged up. As you can see here, just to show you what I'm talking about, this is what it looks like in the back. Ribbon cable is plugged in, 12-volt power is plugged into the PCB. So we'll just set this aside, and we're going to turn it on now to make sure everything does turn on. So flip the power switch and make sure it comes up. And if everything, and there we go, it's coming up and everything looks good. So now that everything's powered up and everything looks good, we are ready to put this back in the cabinet. So you can fast forward to part 6, which is install the bezel back to the Arcade1UP. So just go into, if you go into the description, it should tell you the time index where to start that step. Okay, so if you're watching this part of the video, that means you are doing the 17-inch vertical modification. So we're going to start with sub step A, which is gluing the wood strips to the back of the bezel. So the parts you're going to need your Arcade1UP stock wood bezel. Then you're going to need the two 13¼ inch wood strips that you cut from step 4 sub step G. You're going to need wood glue. You're going to need 6 ratchet clamps or the clamps that you purchased. And it's possible that you may have to use a utility knife to recut the wood strips if they interfere with the 2 screw holes that are used to connect the bezel to the Arcade1UP marquee when it's in the cabinet. Then you're also going to need your sand block or sandpaper. You're going to need 1 pair of needle nose pliers. This is to get little globs of glue that may seep from the wood glue to get those off, but you can probably use your fingers as well. And then 1 rag to kind of clean up the wood glue that seeps out when you attach the wood strips. Okay, so this is a representation of the back of the 17-inch vertical wood bezel from the Arcade1UP. So as you can see, we're going to place those wood strips on the top and the bottom of where the monitor cutout is, and we're going to put those in place with wood glue, and we're going to clamp them down for an hour or 2, and then once they're clamped, then they'll be in place. Now you'll notice that there's a clean edge and there's a rough edge on the wood strip. The clean edge should face the monitor cutout, while the rough edge should point away from it. And also the clean edge should be flush with the edge on the horizontal cutout, which will allow the monitor to slide in place without being obstructed. Okay, so here's the front of the bezel for the vertical, 17-inch vertical. So we're just going to flip that over, And notice how I got them marked on the top back here just to make sure I know which is the top. So we're going to take our two wood strips and should have a clean edge and a rough edge. And we're going to take the clean edge and point it towards where the monitor cut out and kind of line it up. And so I'm just, what I'm doing right now is just making sure it's centered as far as, because the strip is longer than the vertical top there, so I'm just centering it to make sure it just looks good. And then once we get it all placed, then we'll apply our wood glue to the wood strips. Okay, so we got our wood strip. We're going to flip it over, and we're just going to put a generous amount of wood glue on here. And once we do that, then we're going to place it on the bottom here. So once we get the wood glue on there, then we're going to flip it over, and we're just going to place it on there. Sorry if the camera's cut it off a little bit, but essentially we're just going to set it, kind of line it up with the edge of the monitor cut out, and then we're going to do the same thing with the second one. Okay, so now that we got the second one, got the glue on there, we're just going to place that, and again lining it up to where the clean edge is flush with the cutout of the monitor. And again, I apologize if the camera's being cut off there, but again, we're just lining that up. So once everything's lined up, we're going to take our clamps and we're going to start clamping down. So we're going to use 3 clamps per strip. We're going to put one on the left, one in the middle, one on the right. You can use less clamps if you want to. I just use 6 to make sure it's uniform. And then as you clamp it down, just kind of line up, make sure that the clean edge there is flush with the edge of the monitor cutout. And you'll keep doing this as you add a clamp. Now, as I said before, if you cut this to where both edges have a rough edge, that's fine too. Just make sure that the rough edge doesn't exceed out of the monitor cutout, or else when you try to when we put in the monitor later, it's going to impede it. And that's fine too. You just have to sand it down, but just to prevent that from happening, just make sure it doesn't exceed out of the wood strip doesn't exceed out into the monitor cutout. So as you can see, we got the first one clamped, and now we're going to clamp the top one. Okay, so now we got the final top of it clamped up. Again, just make sure that the clean edge is flush with the edge on the horizontal monitor, and just wipe off any excess glue. And we're just going to let that sit for about 2 hours before we unclamp it and continue on. Okay, so about 2 hours have passed, and we can take these clamps off. And once we get all the clamps off, we will set them aside. Okay, so now that we've got all of our clamps off, that's it. The wood strips are in place. So as a final step, we're just going to get rid of any excess glue that's on the sides there. So we're going to grab our sand block and just kind of give it a good once over, just to kind of clean off any glue. And once we do that, or you can use your fingers to pick off the excess glue as well. But after you do that, that's it. Our wood strips are installed, and we can move on to the next step. Okay, so now that we're ready to go to sub-step B, which is line up the stock acrylic A1UP Arcade1UP bezel. This is just a line up to check to make sure that the bezel does line up with the LCD panel that we put in there before we screw it down to the back of the bezel. So the parts you're going to need the stock Arcade1UP acrylic bezel. You're going to need the stock Arcade1UP wood bezel, and then you're going to need your 17-inch LCD panel with the brackets on there that you did in step 4, sub-step F. Okay, so this diagram is showing you a before and after, basically, of the 17-inch vertical LCD panel before we put the align the acrylic bezel in after. So, and the reason why we're doing this is so that we can make sure everything's lined up properly and everything looks even. So essentially, if you look on the left, this is what it looks like before we put the bezel on. So when we As you can see, the monitor has like a silver outline around it, and we want to make sure that's all covered up with the stock acrylic bezel. So if you look on the right, you know, as we place the acrylic bezel on there, that's what it should look like. Now, if there's any silver still showing on the outline of the monitor, that's fine, because we're going to cover that up with friction tape. But normally the Arcade1UP bezel usually is designed to where that the graphic that's on there should cover up all that silver outline. But regardless, we just want to make sure that the monitor is straight and everything looks right, and that's why we're going to do this. So let's proceed. Okay, so we got the bezel, and the top of it should be facing away from you, and we're just going to place the LCD panel in here. It should fit. Just get used to making sure that that LVDS port on the monitor is pointing to the left and not to the right. If it's pointing to the right, then your image is going to be upside down. So just make it a habit to make sure that that port is on the left. Anyway, so once we get it in there, we're just going to flip it over. And once we get it flipped over and set down, we're just going to make sure the monitor is straight and everything looks right. And if it is, everything looks good, then we're going to take our stock Arcade1UP acrylic panel, and we're just going to set that on there and line it up with the screw holes, just to make sure that none of that silver perimeter is showing. And if it is showing, by the way, we're going to cover that up with friction tape, so it's not going to be bad, but the Arcade1UP bezel will pretty much should cover up all that silver. But again, if not, friction tape we'll be putting on there will cover it. So once we got that confirmed, that's about it. We'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're going to move on to sub-step C, which is screwing the LCD panel to the back of the bezel. So the parts you're going to need for this, you're going to need a stock Arcade1UP wood bezel with the wood strips attached that you just did in step 5, sub-step A. You're going to need your 17-inch LCD panel with the brackets attached that you did in step 4, sub-step F. And you're also going to need your power drill with the 1/8 inch drill bit. And this says optional because you can probably just use it if you can probably just use your Phillips head screwdriver to screw it down, or if you have a power screwdriver or something, you can just screw in the screws that way. But I use a power drill with the 1/8 inch drill bit to drill my pilot holes. Then you'll need 8 number 6 1/2 inch wood screws, and you'll need a Phillips head screwdriver to screw those screws in, or you can use your power drill if you have the right bit head, the bit for the size of the screw that you're screwing in, or a power screwdriver, whichever you prefer. I just prefer to use a Phillips head screwdriver. Okay, so this is the picture of the back of the 17-inch vertical bezel, and as you can see how we're going to place the LCD panel on the back of it. So you see where the brackets are on top of the wood strips that we glued on there. So basically we're going to put those on, we're going to place the LCD panel on there, and then we're going to put 8 number 6 1/2 inch screws on the brackets, 2 for each bracket, 1 on the left, 1 on the right. We're not going to put a screw in the middle, it's not needed, but as long as we got the left and right screw in there on each bracket, it should hold it in place. Also note where the LVDS port is. Notice that it's to the left. Make sure when you put the monitor in, the LVDS port is on the left side. This will make sure that on the vertical monitor, when you plug it into the Arcade1UP PCB, or even for a computer for that matter, that it will show correctly vertically. If it's pointing to the right, then the image is going to show upside down. So make sure that that LVDS port is pointing to the left. Okay, so we got our LCD monitor. We have our wood bezel there. That's the back of it, and the top is facing away from you. So what I'm pointing out there is making sure the LVDS port is to the left. Again, if it's on the right, your image is going to be upside down. So what we're going to do is we're going to drill pilot holes on the holes on the brackets there. So we're going to drill pilot holes for each bracket on the left and right hole. We're not going to put a screw in the center because it's not needed. So we're going to take our drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit, and we're just going to line it up with the hole and screw it and drill our pilot hole. Just make sure we do have to make sure that we have to drill deep enough to where it gets in the wood strip and through that MDF on the bezel. So again, we're just going to drill all the pilot holes on the left and right of the brackets. Okay, so once we drill our final pilot hole, just kind of wipe away the sawdust or the MDF dust, or whatever you want to call it, away. And then once we do that, then we're going to take our number 6 1/2-inch screws, and we're just going to take, and then we're going to take our Phillips head screwdriver, and we're just going to put each screw in the pilot hole we just drilled, and we're just going to screw the screws down. And we're going to repeat that for the other 7 pilot holes that we drilled. Okay, and once we get that final screw in, that should be it. The panel is attached to the wood bezel now. I just kind of shake it a little bit just to make sure everything's stable. And that's it. The last part of this to test is just to kind of flip it over and make sure that the monitor is flush with the outline, the monitor outline, or else if it's not, then it's going to cause some issues when you put the plexi on. And with that, we can move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're ready to do sub-step D, which is apply the friction tape. So we're applying black friction tape around the edges, the perimeter of the LCD monitor, so it covers up that silver outline, so that if for some reason the marquee doesn't cover that up, it will show as black instead of silver. So for this part, you're going to need your stock Arcade1UP wood bezel with the LCD panel attached, which you just did. You're going to need 1 roll of friction tape, preferably black, and you're also going to need your utility knife, which is optional. This is to cut the friction tape. If most of the time friction tape you can just tear it because it's made of cloth or cotton, but in some cases it may be a little hard to tear off, so you may need your utility knife to cut it, or a pair of scissors if that's what you prefer. Okay, so this is an image of the front of the vertical LCD panel in the bezel. Of course, the monitor's already screwed down, but you can see the before we put the friction tape on. And the reason why we're putting the friction tape on is just to cover up those silver, the outline of the monitor. So if anything's exposed, if the LCD acrylic or plexiglass is off, it's going to show black instead of that silver. So on the before picture to the left, you see how the monitor is and where it has the exposed, the silver outline. And then after we put the friction tape on there, you'll see that it's all black. So again, and we're going to put the friction tape all around the perimeter of the monitor to cover up that silver outline. Okay, so we got our monitor, the front of the monitor with the top of it facing away from you. So we're just going to take our friction tape. We're going to just estimate how much of a length we need, and then we're just going to tape it onto the bezel and the monitor, covering up that silver outline on the perimeter of the monitor. So once we get our tape, we're just going to kind of lightly apply it, make sure it lines up and covers up that whole silver perimeter there. And once we got it lined up, then just kind of use your fingers to press down on it to keep it in place. And we're going to do that for the rest of the perimeter of the monitor. Okay, and now we're going to apply our final strip of tape here. And if the tape is a little longer than what you need, that's fine. You just tear it off what you need once you get it applied. And once we get this one applied on there, that's it. The whole perimeter is covered with the friction tape, covering up that silver perimeter. And once that's done, we can move on to the next part of this, getting this assembled. Okay, so now we're ready to do sub-step E, which is add electronic components to electronic backboard. So these are the parts that you'll need for this. We're going to need a 5.5-inch electronic back panel that you cut in step 4, sub-step B. You're going to need power drill with a 1/8-inch drill bit. You're going to need 8 machine screws from the PCB feet kit that you purchased. You're going to need an inverter board with PCB feet attached. You're going to need LVDS cable with ground cable attached. You're going to need your Arcade1UP PCB with metal case with the PCB feet attached. that was done in step 4, substep C. You're going to need your LCD controller board with PCB feed attached, and the LCD controller board control panel with PCB attached that were both done in step 4, substep C. Now the LCD controller and the LCD controller board control panel are optional. If you're using this if you're just connecting this LCD panel to the Arcade1UP PCB, you do not need the LCD controller board or the controller board control panel. However, I purchased both, and for those that purchased it, you're going to put it in there in case you decide at some point that you want to use this for a PC or a Pi, and that way you can just easily move the cables over to the controller board from the PCB to the controller board. And you're going to possibly need a jigsaw with a wood blade or a wood saw, and this is going to be needed in case we're going to put the wood panel on the back just to kind of position it before we do anything. And if that wood panel is obstructing the holes where on the top where it screws in from the bezel that goes into the back of the marquee, we'll have to cut the panel to make sure that those holes aren't obstructed. And then finally, you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver to screw down the machine screws as well. And then you also need your metallic ruler or speed square, or the ruler that you purchased if you didn't purchase a metallic ruler or a speed square. And finally, your black Sharpie. Okay, so this is a visual interpretation of the electronics backboard for the 17-inch for the vertical mod. So as you can see, you can arrange the electronic components however you want to, but in my case, this is about the best way I can think of doing it for this particular LCD panel. So going from the bottom to the top, if you look at the legend there, so you have the inverter on the bottom, and then on the top, and then out on the top of that, on the left, you have the Arcade1UP PCB, and to the right of that, the LCD controller board. And then right above that, you have the LCD controller board control panel. And again, this is probably the best way to do it. And the reason why we have the inverter board on the bottom there is because that's where the lamp cables are coming from on the bottom. So if you put that higher on the top, those lamp cables aren't going to reach. So that's why we want to put them as close to the lamp cables as possible. But again, you can arrange it any way you want to. This is probably the best way to do it in this case. Each monitor is different. Else the lamp cables may be in a different location, so you may want to adjust it depending on the LCD panel that you're using. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is to make sure the electronic panel, the backboard, doesn't impede the cabinet brackets on the left and the right, and the holes on the top that are used to secure the marquee to the back of the panel once you put it back in the Arcade1UP cabinet. Now, of course, I already know that the cabinet brackets aren't going to be impeded because we're doing this vertically, but we just need to double check to make sure that those two screw holes on the top, again, which are used to attach the marquee to the LCD bezel, are not being obstructed. And in this case, they're not. So then we just so putting the board, we're kind of centering it just to get an idea where we're going to put it, and once we do that, then we can start putting the components on the backboard. Okay, so we got the backboard, and we're going to make our borders here. So from left to right, we're going to measure a 1/2 inch, and from right to left, we're going to measure a 1/2 inch. So we're going to take our ruler here and take our Sharpie, and we're just going to mark, again, coming from left to right, a 1/2 inch, and then coming from right to left, a half inch. And then we'll do the same thing for the bottom. So make our notches and do the same thing towards the bottom, make our 2 notches. And once we do that, then what I use is my speed square to draw the straight line, but I mean, you can use your ruler to do it as well. Just line up the 2 notches with your speed square or your ruler and just draw your straight lines. Now that'll be the border to where you won't put any electronic equipment, so that's the border. So any of the electronic components will not cross those lines. And now we can put the components on the backboard itself. Okay, so here's our back panel, and we have our components in front of us. We also have our machine screws for our plastic legs, our PCB legs. So we're going to orient the board in a vertical orientation. And the first thing we're going to place on there is the inverter board, and we're going to place that on towards the bottom. And to get this on there, we'll have to move the legs a little bit to probably like about 45-degree angle so that they'll screw into the wood. And once we get it lined up, then we can tighten the screws on the top of the legs in case they got loosened. But then what we're going to do is we're going to take our power drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit, and we're going to drill the hole. You may want to go deep on this to make sure those machine screws go in, and then take one of our machine screws and screw that in to hold it in place. And then once we do that, we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so once we get that last screw in, we're ready to move on to the Arcade1UP PCB board. Okay, so we got our PCB board, so we're going to start connecting our cables up to the PCB. So first thing we're going to connect is the LVDS cable to the PCB. Notice where I'm holding it, we have the white dot to the left. That indicates pin 1. And in the PCB with this orientation, pin 1 is to the left as well. So we want to line that up and plug that in. Again, we want to make sure that lineup is correct, because if it's backwards, it may damage your PCB or your monitor. So once we do that, then we're going to unscrew the one of the PCB screws so we can put the ground cable in. Okay, so once we get the screw out, we're going to insert that into the ground cable screw hole, and then we're just going to screw that back on to the Arcade1UP PCB, and just make sure it's tight and make sure it's got a good ground connection. Now once we get that connected, then we're going to plug the inverter power cable into the PCB as well. So this only goes one way, so just plug that in. And then once we got all the cables plugged in, then we will attach the Arcade1UP PCB to the board. Now when we do this, make sure the ribbon cable is facing away from the electronic board. Also, do the same thing with the LVDS cable, because if not, you'll just have to kind of go over the PCB casing, and if you put it underneath there, it just makes it a lot easier, since the LVDS port on the monitor is to the left. So once you got it orientated correctly, then we're just going to take our drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit, line it up, drill a hole, and then screw in our machine screw for the first hole here. And then we'll repeat that for the second PCB foot. Okay, and once we got the second foot screwed down, then that Arcade1UP PCB is in place. So now the next thing that we're going to screw down is the LCD controller board with the LCD controller board control panel. Again, if you decided that you just wanted to use this for the Arcade1UP PCB, you wouldn't have to do this, but I bought the LCD controller board in case in the future I want to connect a PC or a Pi to it. Now we're only going to do the top two. We're only going to screw down the top two PCB feet. We're not going to screw down the other 2 feet underneath, because those would be kind of difficult to get to. But just screwing down these 2 feet will be good enough. So as you can see, I already screwed the pilot hole, and I'm lining up the PCB foot with the hole I just drilled, and we're going to screw that down, and then we'll do the same thing for the other foot. Okay, so I'm screwing the final screw down. As you can see, this is kind of a little bit of a tight corner here to get to screw down that LCD control panel down. So I left it in place, but you can unscrew the from the top there. You can unscrew the Arcade1UP PCB metal casing there. If you need to screw down the LCD control panel, it makes it a little bit easier. The other thing I didn't do, which I should have done, is I want to kind of route the control panel cable for the LCD controller board underneath the LCD controller board itself. So what I should have done is I should have made sure that that cable was underneath before I drilled it down. Again, you don't have to do this. This is just a preference so the cable's not hanging out. But I could have just I should have just unscrewed it from the top, but I'm just stubborn that way. So I just kind of routed it underneath there, and then once it's routed underneath, then connect it up to the control panel back up. Again, this is just my preference. If you don't want to route it underneath there and anything, that's fine. It just looks cleaner to me. But anyway, once you do that, or once you decide not to do it, then we'll drill the control panel in. So starting with one of the legs, use your power drill with your 1/8 inch drill bit, drill in, and take your machine screw and screw it in. And then once you get that screwed down, we'll repeat that on the other side. And once we get that final screw in place on the second leg, that's it. We have all the components on our electronic backboard, and we're ready to put this on the back of the Arcade1UP bezel. Okay, now we're ready to move to sub-step E, which is attaching an electronic back panel to the back of the bezel. So for this, you're going to need your 5.5 inch electronic back panel or backboard with the electronic components attached to it. You're going to need your power drill with the 1/8 inch drill bit to drill your pilot holes. You're going to need your 4 No. 6 1-inch wood screws, and you're going to need your Phillips head screwdriver to screw those in, or you can use your power drill with the correct bit, or you can use a power screwdriver to screw the wood screws in place. And then once the electronic back panel is attached to the back of the bezel, then we'll go ahead and plug in the LCD lamps and connect the LVDS cable to the monitor itself. So again, we have a virtual representation of what the back of the 17-inch vertical LCD panel now looks like, and essentially where we're going to place the electronic backboard. So basically we're going to try to center it on the back here, and then once we have it centered on the on top of the wood strips, we're going to put 4 No. 6 1-inch screws in the back of it, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, to hold that panel in place. And then after that, we're going to plug in the lamp cables, and then we'll plug in the LVDS cable coming from the Arcade1UP PCB into the monitor itself. Okay, so now we got the back of our bezel again. We're going to attach the electronic panel to the back of this. Now, before you do this, you may want to connect your LVDS cable to the monitor before you put this in. You can wait till afterward, but what I found, it's because the wood panel is kind of, you don't have a whole lot of space after you put in the wood panel. It's a little bit difficult to plug in that. So you may want to plug that LVDS cable in now. And again, just you got little clips on the LVDS cable. Just pinch those in and then just plug it into the port. But at any rate, to attach this electronic panel, basically we're going to line it up on the wood strip. Make sure it doesn't impede the top there, the screws up there, which it doesn't. Those 2 screw holes on the top there that connect the marquee to the bezel. So we're just going to, once we line it up, we're just going to take our power drill, drill our pilot hole on the right side, and do it on the left side as well. And then once we get our pilot holes drilled, we're going to take our No. 6 1-inch screws. We're going to take 2 of those, and then we're going to take one of them and put it in the pilot hole that we just drilled, and then just take our Phillips head screwdriver and start screwing it down. Now if you have a power drill, if you want to use attachment for a power drill to screw it in, or you got a power screwdriver, please go ahead. I just use the Phillips head. But once we do that for the right side, we'll do it for the left side. Okay, so once we get that screw on the left screwed in, we got the one side done. We're just going to turn this around 180 degrees so we can get to the top of it. And we're going to do the same thing. Once we get that lined up, it should be lined up. We're going to take our power drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit, screw our hole in, and do the same thing over on this side. And then once we get those in, we're going to take 2 more No. 6 1-inch screws, and we're just going to stick that in one in the pilot hole and start screwing it down. And then once we get that completely screwed down, we're going to do the same thing on the left one. Okay, once we get that final screw in, that's pretty much it for that. And we're going to flip it back to where the top's facing away from us. And it's screwed in. Now next step is we're going to plug in the lamps. In this case, for this particular monitor, the lamps have writing on the top, and that's the top of the that plugs in. So we're just going to plug both of those in and then plug in the other side as well. And then once we get those lamps plugged in, then we'll plug in the LVDS cable. And again, probably should have done the LVDS cable before putting this on because it's such a cramped space now that we got the panel on there. But anyway, you're gonna use your fingers. There's two clips on it. You're gonna use your fingers to clip it, and then just get it, and it should just slide in place. And it should only go one way. Now remember, like I said, I should have done this before we put the board on and attached that on there because it's so cramped. So in order to get this in here, I'm gonna have to turn it 90 degrees. So I'm looking at it from the top to get it in there. But if you're having problems, once you have this on there, if you're having problems getting it in because it's so cramped, go ahead and take the panel off and then plug in your cable, and then reattach the panel since you have it all. You have all the pilot holes screwed in. But once we get that cable plugged in, that should be it. So the back panel's on there. And then what I usually do is, as far as the exposed cables and things like that, I'll put them underneath the Arcade1UP PCB casing that's there. Just kind of stick it all under there. And that's it. Everything's good to go. And so now we just have to put the Arcade1UP stock bezel back on the front of it. Okay, now we're going to move on to sub-step F, which is we're going to apply the Arcade1UP stock acrylic panel back to the bezel. So for this, we're going to need our stock Arcade1UP acrylic panel. Of course, we're going to need our wood bezel with the LCD panel attached to it. We're also going to need the 4 screws that held in the Arcade1UP acrylic panel, and we're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver to screw those screws back in. So basically, we're just lining up the acrylic to the holes, the original holes, and then it's screwing it back down. Now when we apply the acrylic panel back on here, normally we want to lay the wood bezel flat, but because the electronic backboard is on there, it's not going to lay flat. And in this case, you really don't have to lay it flat, but it's just going to be a little awkward. So if you want to lay it flat down and then apply the acrylic, take the back panel off by taking off the 4 screws. But for me, I just leave the back panel on. I just try to be careful not to push down on it too hard, or else you may like bend the metal box that's around the Arcade1UP PCB and things like that. But this shouldn't be too hard to do. You're not putting a whole lot of pressure on it, so just use your best judgment on how to, if you want to take that electronic back panel off or not before screwing on the acrylic bezel. Okay, so this is a virtual representation or diagram of what the front of the bezel with the 17-inch vertical LCD panel looks like now. So if you look on the left, this is what it looks like currently. So the black outline represents the friction tape that we've put on there. And then on the right is what it's going to look like after we put the stock Arcade1UP acrylic bezel back on. And again, we're just using the 4 screws that originally held it down, where we're using those screws to hold it down again. And once it's in place and everything's lined up, everything should be good. Just know that if it's off a little bit, since we outlined the monitor with the friction tape, even if it's a little bit off, it's going to show black instead of that silver. But in the previous step, we already lined it up, so everything should look good and ready to go once we apply it on there. Okay, so now that we got the front of we're looking at the front of our bezel here. By the way, you may want to get some glass cleaner or something to clean off the LCD to get all the fingerprints off there. So essentially now we're just going to put our Arcade1UP stock acrylic bezel back on, and we're going to use the same screws that held it in. We're going to screw those back in. So once we line up the bezel with the screw holes there on the wood bezel, again we're just going to screw all those down. So starting in the top left right corner there, and we're going to repeat the same thing for all the other screw holes. So once we put in that final screw, that's it, and we're ready to test this by connecting it to the Arcade1UP PCB to make sure it works properly. Okay, which brings us to the final sub-step here for step 5, which is sub-step G, which is testing the LCD panel. We're just testing it before we put it back in the Arcade1UP cabinet, in case we get a test pattern or something doesn't work, and we can correct any issues before we put it back into the cabinet. So for this, you're going to need your Arcade1UP bezel with the LCD panel in there. You're also going to need your Arcade1UP control panel, and you're going to need the Arcade1UP power supply. And with all that connected up, we can turn it on to test to make sure that the monitor does work properly. Okay, so we've got our bezel with our monitor and everything connected up to the control panel. Just going to turn around here to show you. So we got the ribbon cable plugged into the back of the PCB, and we also got our 12-volt power supply plugged into the PCB as well. So with that all plugged in, hopefully when we turn it on, it will come up. So we're just going to power it on here. Wait a moment. And it should pop up. And we're getting sound, just so you know, I just muted the sound on this clip, but everything seems to be working. Now with that done, you can proceed on to step 6, which is to install the your new panel and everything back into the Arcade1UP cabinet. So please look in the description to find out what time index you need to go to for step 6. Okay, so if you're watching this part of the video, that means you're actually performing the 19-inch horizontal LCD mod. So we're going to start with sub-step A, which is gluing the wood strips to the back of the bezel. So the parts you're going to need for this, you're going to need your stock A1UP wood bezel that you cut to fit the 19-inch LCD panel. And this was cut in step 4, sub-step J. You're also going to need your two 7 1/4 inch wood strips that were cut from step 4, sub-step G, along with the two 4-inch wood strips that you cut from the same step, which would be step 4, sub-step G. You're also going to need your wood glue. You're also going to need your ratchet clamps, and you're also possibly going to need a utility knife with a fresh blade. Now this is just in case the wood strips block the outline of the cabinet brackets, which means it wouldn't go back in properly. But because of the way we cut these strips, that shouldn't be an issue, but just have it handy just in case. Okay, you're also going to need your sand block or sandpaper, and we're going to use that to sand down the sides to get rid of any excess glue that's seeped through. You're also going to need some needle nose pliers, which are optional. This is to get any globs of glue that have accumulated, but you can probably use your fingers to pick those off as well. Don't necessarily need needle nose pliers. And finally, you'll need a rag to kind of clean up any of the excess glue if needed. Okay, so here's a diagram of what the back of the 19-inch horizontal bezel would look like. As you can see, now originally these wood strips were cut at 13 1/4 of an inch in length, but in a previous step in part 2, we cut these strips into a 7 1/4 inch and a 4-inch cut. And that's because, as you can see in the diagram, you see where we have the outline where the cabinet bracket would be. If we just put in the full length of that wood strip, it would block us from putting the screws back in the bracket, and it wouldn't go in. So that's why we had to cut it. So as you can see in the diagram, on the left and the right, on the top you'd put the 4-inch wood strip, and on the bottom you're going to put the 7 1/4 inch wood strip making sure that it doesn't interfere with the outline of the cabinet bracket that you have outlined there. And essentially we're just going to glue those down to the sides. And you'll notice also that there's a clean cut and a rough cut. So when you cut this, you'll have, of course, a rough cut and a clean cut on each side of the wood strip that you have. You want the clean cut to go in towards where the monitor cutout is, and then the rough cut to face away from the monitor cutout. Also, you're going to want to make sure that the clean cut edge is flush with the monitor cutout edge, meaning it shouldn't protrude out into the cutout, or else the monitor won't sit right when you place it in there. Okay, so this is the back of the Arcade1UP wood bezel. The top should be facing away from you. As you can see, I got written on there the top. So we have our two 7¼ inch strips and our two 4-inch strips. And as you can see, I don't have the outlines drawn on for the cabinet brackets. I forgot to do that. But in this case, you would have them drawn on there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to glue these on the back of the bezel. Okay, so I'm just taking the, we're going to take the strips now and just set them on the bezel just to kind of get an idea where we're going to place them. So we just want to make sure that the clean edge is facing towards the monitor cutout there, and we want to make sure that it's kind of flush there. We don't want it protruding into the monitor cutout, because if it does, once we put the monitor in there, it may not fit right. So just kind of line it up, use your finger just to make sure that it's kind of flush and smooth, and and just place it there for right now. Now you see where I'm placing these, and let's do the same thing for the 7 1/4 inch wood strip. Now you see how I'm placing these, you see where the bracket is. Again, you would have an outline around that cabinet bracket where those two holes are, but I forgot to do that. So to just give you an example, I got a bracket here, but you would have an outline, but see where I put it. Now you see where I put the wood strips. It doesn't basically affect where the bracket is, so that's where we're going to place them. So so then again, just taking that, we're going to flip it over, and then we're going to put our glue on each strip, and we're just going to you can put a generous amount of glue on there, and then once you do that, and then we're just going to place it for right now. And again, just again, make sure that it's it's flush with the monitor outline there. And then we're going to repeat that with the other 3 strips for the 7 1/4 strip, and then do the right side as well. Okay, so I'm gluing the last strip here. And just putting it in place. And again, and if any glue seeps out, that's fine. We're going to clean that up later. But just get a rag to clean it up if you want to do it right now. But once we get that done, we're going to use our clamps now and clamp these down. So we're going to use one clamp. We're going to use one of the clamps to hold in the 4-inch strip, and then we're going to use 2 clamps to hold in each 7 1/4 inch strip. So just kind of get it centered, and I apologize for the camera angle there, but again, you're just kind of centering it, and as you're clamping it down, you're making sure that if the wood strip moves, just to replace it to make sure again that it's flush with the monitor the monitor outline that we did. And again, we're going to do it for the other side of the 4-inch, and then we'll move on to the 7 1/4 inch ones. Okay, so we're doing the 7 1/4 inch strips now. Again, we're going to use 2 clamps. We're going to use we're going to clamp one on the top, one on the bottom. And again, as you're doing that, make sure that if the wood strip moves, just reposition it, and then just again clamp it down. And once we do that for the one side, we'll go ahead and do it for the other side as well. Okay, once we put the final clamp in place, again, just make sure the wood strip is lined up again. And once that's done, then we're just going to let this sit for about 2 hours before we continue. Okay, so 2 hours have passed, so we're ready to take off these clamps. So we're just going to disconnect them all. And once we disconnect them all, we can get them out of the way. And that's it. The wood strips should be attached to the bezel now. So all that remains is just to get rid of some of that excess glue that's there that may have seeped over. So we're just going to take our going to put it on its side here and then take our sand block. We're just going to sand it down a little bit just to kind of get rid of that excess glue. And if they're big glops of glue, you can just use like your fingers or some needle nose pliers to remove those glops of glue. And we can move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're going to begin sub-step B, which is lining up the poster board on the bezel. Now we did this back in step 4, sub-step K, but we're going to do it again just to double check everything and make sure that you don't want to make additional adjustments to the poster board or to the positioning of the LCD panel before we screw it down. So the parts needed for this, of course, you're going to need the poster board outline that you cut in step 4, sub-step I. You're going to need a wood bezel that you cut for the 19-inch LCD panel that was cut in step 4, sub-step J. And you're going to need your 19-inch LCD panel with brackets that you set up in step 4, sub-step F. Okay, so here's a before and after picture of what it's going to look like when we line up the poster board with the 19-inch horizontal LCD panel. So before we put the poster board in, you'll see the LCD screen is in place and it has it has its the silver outline around it and things like that around the perimeter. So we're just going to line up the poster board again with the screw holes that hold held the Arcade1UP bezel in place, and we're just going to line it up to make sure we can see the full screen and everything. Now you've already done this before in a previous step. But we're just doing it again just to make sure everything again looks right once we before we actually screw this down to the monitor. That way you can make any corrections that you need to in order for it to fit properly. Okay, so we're going to line up our poster board. We have the back of the bezel here with the top pointing away from you. So we're just going to slip in the LCD panel. Just again, make sure the LVDS connector is pointing to the top there, or else the image is going to be upside down. It's not going to matter in this case, but just get used to making sure that LVDS port is towards the top there. And then once you get it in there, flip it over, and then adjust the wood bezel kind of to make sure that it's lined up straight and how you're going to drill it down. And then you're going to take your poster board and you're going to take your the 4 holes on the poster board that line up with the 4 holes where the original Arcade1UP acrylic bezel went, and we're just going to line that up, and we're just going to make sure that everything looks good. Don't worry again if the silver is showing. That's going to be covered with friction tape, so even if it's exposed, everything's going to look black. So everything does look good here, but if you want to make additional cuts, to even it out or whatever you want to do, you can do it at this time. But everything looks good, so we're ready to move on to the next step, which is to attach the LCD to the wood bezel. Okay, so the next step in the next sub-step, I should say, in the 19-inch horizontal mod is going to be sub-step C, which is going to be screwing the LCD panel to the back of the bezel. So what you're going to need to do this, you're going to need your wood bezel that you cut for the 19-inch LCD panel with the wood strips attached that we did in sub-step A for step 5, which is this step. Then you're going to need your 19-inch LCD panel with brackets that we attached in step 4, sub-step F. You're going to need your power drill with the 1/8 inch drill bit. This says it's optional for these wood screws. You may get away with just taking your Phillips head screwdriver or power screwdriver and screwing them in. But I like to use a power drill with the 1/8 inch drill bit to drill the piled holes first. Then you're going to need 8 and 6/2 inch wood screws. And finally, you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver to screw the screws in. However, you can use your power drill with the right bit, or you can use a power screwdriver to screw the screws in. I just prefer to use a regular Phillips head screwdriver. Okay, so here's the back of the, this would be the back of the 19-inch horizontal bezel with the LCD panel placed in there. Now you'll notice that the brackets should, one each should go on the 4-inch wood strip, and another one should go on the 7¼ inch wood strip. At least for this panel. Other panels may vary, but for the most part they should set this way. Now the other things to note is to make sure the LVDS port is facing towards the top of the bezel, because if it's not, of course the image is going to show upside down. But anyway, once we set this in place, we're going to screw down each bracket with 2 screws, one on the top, one on the bottom. We're not going to do the middle one, and we're going to do that with 8 number 6 1/2 inch screws, 2 for each bracket. And then once we screw those down, the LCD panel should be in place and should be secure. Okay, so we've already set the monitor in place. Just make sure the LVDS port is pointing towards the top of the bezel, which is pointing away from us. So once we have it set in place, we're going to take our number 6 1/2 inch screws, and what we're going to do on each bracket, we're going to put a screw in the top and the bottom. We're not going to put a screw in the middle. So, and just make sure that the brackets are lined up with the wood strips that you cut. In this case, they're all lined up. So we're going to take our power drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit, and we're going to start drilling our pilot holes. And again, for each bracket, we're going to drill a pilot hole in the bottom, and we're going to drill a pilot hole in the top. So just take your power drill, and it doesn't have to go all the way through, just enough to go all the way through the wood strip and the MDF itself. And then once that's done, pull it out, and we're going to repeat that for the top and bottom hole for each bracket. Okay, so we drilled our pilot holes. Now we're going to take our number 6 1/2 inch screws, and we're going to insert them in each pilot hole, and we're just going to screw those down. And again, we're going to do that for each pilot hole that we drilled. And as we screw the last screw down, that should be it. Just pick up the monitor, kind of make sure it's in place, it's secure, and just kind of turn it around and make sure that the monitor itself is kind of flush, or not kind of, it is flush with the rest of the with the monitor outline. Just take your fingers and run them across the edges there, and just make sure it's not protruding out. And once you do that, that's it, and we can move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're on sub-step D, which is applying the friction tape. We're applying friction tape around the perimeter of the LCD monitor. So the LCD monitor around the perimeter has like a silver outline. And basically, if for whatever reason, if the poster board that we're using doesn't cover up all that silver outline, it's going to show, of course, once we put the plexiglass on. So basically we put black friction tape on those silver, around the silver outline around the perimeter, so that if any of that is exposed, it's going to show up black instead of showing that silver. So for this particular step, you're going to need the wood bezel with the 19-inch LCD panel attached, and of course you're going to need your roll of friction tape, and you may need a utility knife to cut the friction tape. Now in most cases, friction tape is pretty easy to tear apart itself. You don't necessarily need a blade to cut it, because it's usually made of cloth, so you can just tear it off and place it. But in some cases it may be a little bit too hard. You can use a utility knife, or if you have a pair of scissors handy, you could use a pair of scissors to cut it as well. Okay, so this is the front of the 19-inch horizontal LCD panel, or the bezel, and so we have a before and after picture, before friction tape is applied and after it's applied. So before it's applied, you see the monitor, and the monitor is going to have a silver outline around the perimeter of it, and that's what we're going to cover up with the friction tape. So if you look at the after, you'll see that it's all black, and that represents the friction tape. So, and this is on there so in case the the poster board doesn't cover up all that silver outline, the black friction tape in place, it will show up as black and not silver. Um, and that way, when we put the poster board and the actual plexiglass on here to cover it up, it looks like it's all black, and it doesn't have that silver outline. Okay, so this is the back of the bezel with the LCD panel with the top facing away from you. So we're just going to flip it over, and we're just going to, along the perimeter of the monitor, we're just going to cover up that silver outline there. So we're going to just take our friction tape, and you're just going to take a piece that's long enough to cover each side and tear it off here. And then you're just going to apply it. You're going to cover the whole silver part of that, and then you want to make sure not to cover the monitor part, just the silver part. So just kind of line it up and set it down gently, and then once you got it lined up, just lightly apply pressure on there to to keep it down. And then we're going to repeat that around the whole perimeter of the monitor. Okay, so we're going to apply our final strip of friction tape on here. Again, we're just going to lightly set it down, and then we're going to apply pressure, just to light pressure, just to apply it, push it down. And once we get that done, that's it, and we can move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're ready to proceed to sub-step E in our 19-inch horizontal mod, which is adding the electronic components to the electronic backboard. So for this step, you're going to need the 17-inch electronic back panel that we cut in step 4, sub-step B. You're going to need a power drill with a 1/8 inch drill bit to drill our pilot holes. You're going to need 8 machine screws from your PCB feed kit. You're going to need your inverter board with PCB feed attached. You're going to need LVDS cable with ground cable attached. You're also going to need your Arcade1UP PCB with the metal case with the PCB feed attached. And again, this was done in step 4, sub-step C. You also need the LCD controller board and LCD controller board control panel with the PCB to feed attached, which was also done in step 4, sub-step C. Now these two are optional. Again, if you're only going to do this to connect the monitor or LCD panel up to an Arcade1UP PCB, you don't need the LCD controller board, or you may not have purchased it. In my case, I purchased it, so we're going to add both on here. And this is just in case if you decide later on you want to add a PC or a Raspberry Pi or whatever device you add to it, you can simply move the cables from the Arcade1UP PCB to the LCD controller board to use that functionality. You'll also need, possibly, you may need a jigsaw with a wood blade or wood saw. This is to cut the panel. So before we put the electronic components on the panel, we're going to line it up on the back of the panel itself to see how it sets, because we need to make sure that the back panel doesn't obstruct the cabinet brackets where we have outlined where the cabinet brackets are going to go back in. So, and if they do get blocked, then we have to make cuts on the back panel to make sure that that's not obstructed. And then finally, we need a Phillips head screwdriver to screw the machine screws in. And you can use a power drill if you want, or a power screwdriver. I just prefer to use a Phillips head screwdriver. You'll also need your metallic ruler or speed square, or the ruler that you happen to purchase if it was a metallic ruler, or if you didn't purchase a speed square. And you'll need your one black Sharpie. Okay, so this is the backboard for the electronic backboard for the 19-inch horizontal mod. So if you look at the legend here, this is the best way to set this up for this particular LCD panel. Now, most of the panels are going to be the same way, but if they're not, you can arrange the components any way you want to on this backboard. This is the way I suggest to do it. That way all the cables reach and you won't have any problems. So starting from left to right, so on the left you have the inverter board, and then to the right of that you have the Arcade1UP PCB, and then to the right of that you have the LCD controller board, and then above that you have the LCD controller board control panel. Now again, if you're only doing this for an Arcade1UP PCB, you don't need the LCD controller board, but we're adding it on there in case people have bought that. But you also notice that on the right and the left you have a 1¼ inch line border. This is that 1¼ inch is used for so we can drill it down into the wood bezel, the Arcade1UP wood bezel. So once we draw those lines, electronic components shouldn't go past those lines. It should be just stay within that border, so to avoid any issues with screwing down the board to the Arcade1UP bezel once we get to that part. Okay, so before we start putting the components on the back panel, the electronic components, we just need to make sure that this panel fits and it doesn't obstruct the cabinet brackets or anything of that nature. So as you can see, when we put this on here, it's not perfectly straight here because how the brackets are aligned. One's up a little bit on the right than on the left, and also as you can see, the if you had your outlines on there on the brackets for the cabinets on the left and right, as you can see, the board is blocking that. So we have to go ahead and we have to cut this so that that the brackets are it doesn't obstruct the brackets, cabinet brackets on the left and right, and just kind of cut a little bit on the bottom there so that, you know, it just goes in straight and just looks good. So essentially we're just going to take a guesswork here. We don't have to have perfect measurements here, so we're just going to take our Sharpie, and you can take a ruler if you want to, but you can freehand this as well. We're just going to kind of get an estimate of where we have to make our cuts here. So as you can see, that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to cut a little bit off, so just that on the bottom there, so that it just looks even when we apply this on here. And then once I do that, then I'm going to go where the cabinet brackets are, and I'm going to just kind of mark off where the cabinet brackets are so that we can make a cutout there, so that there's room for when we put this back in the Arcade1UP, that those brackets don't get blocked or anything. So we're going to go ahead and measure those out and then draw our outlines to cut out. So as you can see, I'm finishing the outlines to where to cut for to make room for those cabinet brackets so they're not blocked. And again, I'm using a ruler, I'm using the speed square, but you can just freehand it. It doesn't have to be perfect. So as you can see, I got those drawn, and now that I have my outlines drawn, we're going to take our wood saw or a jigsaw and cut out these pieces so that this will fit properly. Okay, so I went outside to take the board out here, so we're going to cut out those outlines. Again, if you have a wood saw and you don't have a jigsaw, you can use a wood saw for this, but if you got it's better to use a jigsaw if you have it. So I'm just going to hold this with my hand because we're just doing some shortcuts here. But just hold the board in place and just take your jigsaw and follow the lines that you drew and make those cuts on each side. And then you'll do this for this side, and then we'll do it for the other side. And there you go. And then once you make those cuts, then we'll bring the board back to our workbench or wherever you're working from, and we'll just double check to make sure that it fits. And if we have to make corrections, we'll recut some more. Okay, so now we got our backboard back. We're just going to place that on the bezel again, just to make sure that the cabinet brackets are no longer obstructed and that they look good. And also we got that little cutout for the right bracket, just so that when we apply this, it'll look straight. So with everything looking good, we can begin to apply the electronic components on the backboard. Okay, so now we're going to draw our border lines on the back panel. And so we're just going to take our ruler, and from left to right, we're going to measure 1 1/4 of an inch. And we're going to do the same thing on the right side, measuring from right to left, 1 1/4 of an inch. Then we'll move the ruler down and do the same thing. Again, left to right, 1 1/4 of an inch, and right to left, 1 1/4 of an inch. Then you'll take your speed square or your ruler, line up the notches, and draw your straight lines. And these will make your borders. And so when you put your electronic components on the board, you don't want to go outside the border line, as that's where you're going to put your screws in to hold it in place on the back of the wood bezel. So everything will fall inside this area here. You won't have any electronic components going outside the border. And with that, we can move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're going to screw down our components. We have all our components here, and we have our machine screws to screw down the PCB feet. So the first thing we're going to do is going to get the inverter board. And again, we're not going to cross the border line. Everything's going to stay in between the borders. We don't want it to go outside the border. So we're going to move the feet about 45 degrees so that to make sure it'll be on the wood there. So when we screw it in, and make sure that the power cable is pointing to the right, because that's where it's going to plug into the Arcade1UP PCB. So once you got the feet lined up on the wood to where you can line up the holes so that they are on the wood, we're going to take our drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit, and we're just going to we're going to drill a pilot hole. So just to screw it in, you want to go kind of deep on this, and then we're going to take one of our machine screws, and we're going to put it in there, and we're going to screw that down. And then once we're done with that, we're going to do that for the other side as well. Okay, so we did the pilot hole on the second one, and we're just screwing that screw down, and that's it for the inverter board. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to screw down the Arcade1UP PCB. And as you can see on the feet there, we've got to rotate on 90 degrees, but we're also going to put in the cables now. So we got the LVDS cable. Notice where I'm pointing at that white dot, that indicates pin 1. So you notice the orientation. We have this the PCB board, pin 1 is going to be to the left, so you want to make sure that that white dot, which is pin 1, is lined up on the left side when you plug it in, when you have it in this orientation. So we just want to plug that in. Next thing we're going to do is screw down the ground cable. So we're going to screw one of the screws on the PCB, and we're going to screw down the ground cable. And once you get that screw out, we're just going to thread the ground cable, put it in the hole in the ground cable, and then we're going to screw that back onto the PCB board. Okay, so once we get that screwed down, next thing we're going to do is we're going to plug in the inverter's power cable into the PCB. So this only plugs in one way, so we're just going to plug that in now. And once that's plugged in, then we will attach the Arcade1UP PCB to the electronic backboard. Now, as you can see, the PCB feet are facing 90 degrees, facing upwards. So you may, just make sure. And the reason why we're doing that is to make room for the LCD controller board. They're facing upward, as you can see here. I'm pointing to them. And again, that's because we want to make room for the LCD controller board to fit on there, so it doesn't cross over to the left border, so it's in the confines of that border that we drew earlier. So once we get that lined up, just take your power drill with your 1/8 inch drill bit. Of course, drill your pilot hole. Take one of your machine screws and put the screw in there, and take your Phillips head screwdriver and screw it down. And once that's done, we'll do it for the left side as well. Okay, so now we got the other side screwed down. That's it for the Arcade1UP PCB, and now we're going to screw down the LCD controller board. Now again, if you decided you were not going to use the LCD controller board and just using it for your Arcade1UP PCB, then you don't have to worry about this step. but I decided to get the LCD controller board just in case I want to switch to a PC or a Pi later. That way I can just move over all the cables to this LCD controller and I'm ready to go to use this monitor for a PC or a Pi. We're only going to use the top 2 feet to screw down. So once we drill our pilot hole with our drill with a 1/8 inch drill bit, then we'll repeat it on the other side. And again, only doing the top 2 feet. We're not doing the bottom feet in the middle there. They're just too hard to get to. And this will keep it stable. And there's no need to actually screw down the 2 middle feet on the LCD controller board. So once we get that screwed down, we will move on to the LCD controller board control panel. Okay, so now we got the LCD controller board screwed down. Now we're going to screw down the LCD controller board control panel. So again, we're just going to line that up right above the LCD controller board. We're going to drill our pilot hole, and then we're going to screw that down. Then we're going to take our machine screw, put it in there, and use our Phillips head screwdriver to screw it down. And then once we're done with that, we'll do it for the other side as well. And then once we get that final side screwed in, that's it. We've got all our components screwed into the electronic backboard, and now we're ready to attach it to the back of the bezel. Okay, so now we're moving on to sub-step E, which is attaching the electronic back panel to the back of the bezel. So what you're going to need here is the 17-inch electronic back panel with the electronic components attached that you just did. You'll need a power drill with the 1/8 inch drill bit. You'll need 4 number 6 1-inch wood screws, and you're going to need 1 Phillips head screwdriver. Again, you can use your power drill if you have the right bit, or you can use a power screwdriver. I prefer just to use the Phillips head screwdriver. And then once the electronic back panel is attached, then we'll plug in the LCD lamp cables into the inverter board, and then we'll plug in the LVDS cable into the LCD panel. Okay, so now we're going to, this is a diagram of the back of the, again, the 19-inch horizontal LCD panel, or the bezel. So we're going to screw that electronic bezel onto the back of the Arcade1UP bezel. So essentially we're just going to line it up, and we're going to put 4 screws, 2 on each side. They're going to be number 6 1-inch screws, and we're just going to drill those pilot holes and put those screws in to hold that electronic back panel in place. And then after that, we'll go ahead and plug up the lamp cables and plug the LVDS cable into the monitor itself. Okay, so now we're going to drill this electronic backboard to the back of the bezel on the LCD control panel for the 19-inch. Make sure the top, of course, is facing away from you. So we're going to line it up, make sure that the left and right ends line up with the wood strips that we put down earlier. Just kind of line them up, and then after they're lined up, then we're just going to drill holes. So we're going to do 4 pilot holes, 2 on the left, 2 on the right. Now when we drill these, we have to make sure we go through all the material. So we have to go through the electronic backboard, the wood strip, and the MDF. It doesn't have to go all the way through the MDF, just enough so we can start to screw. So we're going to use our power drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit. Again, just make sure it's lined up, and we're going to drill 2 pilot holes, one on the top and one on the bottom. And then once we get those drilled in, then we're going to get our number 6 1-inch screws. We're going to get 2 of them, and we're going to insert those into the pilot holes, and then we're going to use our Phillips head screwdriver and go ahead and screw that down. And once we get this one attached, we'll do the same one for the bottom pilot hole we drilled. Okay, so now we're just screwing down that last screw on the right side, and now we're going to do the same thing on the left side. We're going to drill our 2 pilot holes Again, making sure it goes through the pilot hole does go through the electronic back panel, the wood strip, and the MDF. Again, do not have to go all the way through to the MDF, just enough to get started. And then again, we're going to take our two of our number 6 1-inch screws, and we're just going to insert them into the pilot holes we did and screw them down with our Phillips head screwdriver. So we're going to do the top one, and then once we screw that down, we'll screw down the bottom one as well. And then once we screw it down, that's it. Then we'll connect our lamp cables. So in this case, for this particular one, these have clamps on them, so the clamps face upward, and just kind of push them in and they'll lock in place. Doesn't matter which cable plugs into which port, as long as they're plugged in, they'll give power to the lamps. And then once we got those plugged in, then we're going to plug in our LVDS cable. What you're going to do is there's 2 clips on there that you pinch, and then once you pinch those sides, then you're just going to slide it into the top there. Now, you have to be a little patient when you plug this in, because you just have to get it just right. So just be patient, and it should plug in fairly easy. It shouldn't be hard to plug in. If it's difficult to plug in, then you probably got it upside down. But in this case, we got it plugged in. And then what I do is usually just hide the cables underneath the Arcade1UP PCB metal casing. And once you do that, that's it. Electronic board's on there. And we can move on to the next sub-step. Okay, so now we're moving on to sub-step F, which is applying the poster board and plexiglass to the bezel. So for this step, you're going to need, the wood bezel with the 19-inch LCD panel attached. That would also have the electronic backboard attached as well. You're going to need your poster board bezel that you cut in step 4, sub-step I. You're going to need your plexiglass bezel with drilled holes that you drilled in step 4, sub-step H. And you're going to need your 4 screws that held the original Arcade1UP acrylic panel in place, because we're going to reuse those screws to screw the plexi and the poster board to the wood bezel. And then finally, you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver. I suggest you use a Phillips head screwdriver for this and not use a power drill, as these screws are relatively short, and if you use too much torque, you could damage the plexiglass. And finally, when we do put this on, when we put the poster board and plexiglass on, you're laying the panel flat on the table. It's not going to lay flat on the table because of the electronic back panel. If you want it to lay flat on the table, you'd have to take the electronic back panel off by removing the 4 screws. But you don't have to do that. Just be careful when you're applying it's just going to move around a little bit because it's not laying flat. But if you do want it to lay flat, take the electronic panel off, apply the plexi and the poster board, and then put the electronic back panel back on. But in this video, I'm actually just leaving the back panel on and applying the poster board and the plexiglass. Okay, so this is a before and after picture of the 19-inch horizontal LCD panel, or the bezel, before and after we apply the poster board and the plexiglass to the bezel. Now you look at the before poster, the before picture, you'll see how it has a black outline around it. That represents the friction tape we put on in an earlier step. And then the after is we're going to put the poster board on and line that up with the holes on the Arcade1UP, and then we're going to do the same thing with the plexiglass and line it up on the holes on the poster board, which should be lined up on the holes on the Arcade1UP wood bezel. And then we're going to use our screws that attached the original Arcade1UP stock acrylic bezel, and we're going to use those screws to screw down the new plexiglass and poster board to the bezel. And once that's done, we're gonna peel off before we apply the plexiglass. We're gonna peel off that back film that's on there, and then once this is in place, then we'll peel off the front film of the plexiglass. Okay, so because we are lining up the poster board and the new plexiglass on the same holes that were screwed down for the original Arcade1UP acrylic bezel, we need to make sure that those aren't being covered up by, if you put down your friction tape and covered up those holes, we need to take that excess tape off. So that's what I'm doing here. So basically I'm just cutting off the excess tape so those holes aren't covered up. And if you've done this too, just do the same thing. Grab your utility knife and just kind of cut off the ends of the tape that are covering up the holes. Okay, so now we're going to take our poster board and line it up on those original holes where the Arcade1UP stock acrylic bezel was. And we're just going to make one final check just to make sure everything lines up the way we want to. And then we're going to take our plexiglass, and on both sides there's a protective film, so we know what the top front is. So on the back of it, we're going to peel off that film, and we're just going to pull that off. And just try not to touch the plexi on the back if you can. That way you don't get fingerprints or anything like that on them. So then what we're going to do with this one, with the plexi, is put it on top of the poster board and line up the holes that are on the plexi with the ones that are on the poster board. And before we do that, what we want to do is we want to peel the four corners here of this film. We just want to peel it enough so that it exposes the holes so we can screw it down to the bezel. And once we got screwed down to the bezel, that's when we'll actually peel the film off. But then basically we just want to line up the plexi hole with the hole on the poster board, and then we're just going to insert our screw, because everything should line up to where we can put a screw in. And then we're going to start screwing the plexi and the poster board down to the bezel. Okay, so once we get the first screw lined up with the hole on the wood bezel and the poster board and the new plexiglass, we're just going to take our screwdriver and we're just going to screw it down. You may have to adjust it a little bit to get that first screw in, just to make sure it does line up with that hole. But once it's there, just take your screwdriver and screw it in. And then once that first screw is in there, you should be able to easily line up everything else. And you'll just repeat that for the other three corners here. So we're just going to, again, we're going to screw that down and then move on to the next corner. Take our screw and start screwing the other corners down. Okay, so once we get that final screw in the corner, we're just going to peel off the protective film. And that's it. Just make sure everything looks good. And it does. And now we can move on to the last step in this process, which is to test the monitor to make sure it comes up. And so now we're at the final sub-step, which is sub-step G, which is to test the LCD panel. We want to test the panel just to get out, to make sure it works, and to fix any bugs or anything like that before we actually put it in the Arcade1UP cabinet. Because if we were just to put this in the Arcade1UP cabinet and test it, and it failed, then you'd have to take it all apart again, take out the panel, and troubleshoot it. So it's best to troubleshoot any problems now before we put the panel back into the cabinet. So the parts you're going to need your Arcade1UP bezel with the LCD panel in it, the one we just built out. You're going to need your Arcade1UP control panel, and you're going to need your Arcade1UP power supply. Okay, so we got everything hooked up here. We've got our control panel connected to the monitor. Ribbon cables connected to the back here, as I'll show you, with the 12-volt power supply plugged into the PCB as well. So if everything works, it should come up. Now if it doesn't come up, if it comes up with like a test screen where it starts flashing different colors, or if it comes up white, it just means you may have the LVDS cable plugged in backwards. So just unplug it from the back of the monitor and turn it around and plug it in. But in this case, we got everything plugged in and everything came up, and I will confirm that sound is working. So with that, that's it. Now you can move on to step 6. So just look in the description to find the time index of where the next step 6 starts, so that you can put this back in your Arcade1UP. Okay, so if you're watching this part of the video, that means you're doing the 19-inch vertical mod. So the first sub-step that we're going to do for this mod is we're going to glue the wood strips to the back of the bezel. So what you're going to need is your stock Arcade1UP wood bezel that you cut for the 19-inch monitor, which was cut from step 4 sub-step J. You're going to need your 1/13 inch wood strip that you cut from step 4 sub-step G. You're also going to need your other 13 inch wood strip with the 2 1/4 inch notches cut that you cut from step 4 sub-step G. You're also going to need your wood glue. You're going to need your 6 ratchet clamps, and you're also possibly may need a utility knife. Now, a utility knife is only going to be used if the wood strips obstruct the screw holes that are on the top of the bezel. Then these holes are used to screw the bezel into the Arcade1UP marquee. But since we already have these strips cut in a way that we actually cut them so that it doesn't obstruct those holes, but just in case our measurements may be off, we may have to cut a little bit off. So just have the utility knife handy in case we need to use it. Okay, and then you also need your sand block or sandpaper, and we're going to use that to sand down any excess glue that leaks out. You're also going to need a pair of needle nose pliers, and this is to get the little globs of glue that may accumulate, but you can use your fingers as well, and this is optional. And then finally, you're going to need a rag or something to clean up the excess wood that seeps out when you put the wood strips in place. So this is the back of the 19-inch vertical bezel that we actually cut the outline out of. And if you look here, we have our 2 wood strips that we cut in a previous step. So you'll notice one is just a complete 13 1/4 inch, and the other strip we cut was 13 1/4 inch, but we also cut 2 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch notches off the top of it, and that will go on the top. And the reason that's going on the top is, as you can see, there's 2 screw holes on the top of the vertical bezel, and these are holes that are needed for the to connect the bezel to the Arcade1UP marquee once it's back installed into the cabinet. So those notches have to be are there so that it allows room for those screws to go in. And on each of the strips, you should have a clean edge and a rough edge. You want the rough edge pointing away from the monitor cutout, and you want the clean edge pointing in towards the monitor cutout. And furthermore, the clean edge, you want it lined up flush with the monitor cutout edge as well. And the reason for this is because if it's not flush when you put the monitor in, it's not going to go in, and you may have to sand it down a little bit, which is fine if you do that. But in the case of these the 19-inch vertical bezel, since we cut those lines, they may not be straight lines, so just make sure that the edge of the wood strip doesn't protrude out of the monitor cutout. That way you can avoid sanding it down. So if it's just a little bit off, it's fine. Just try to keep it as flush as possible. Okay, so this is the vertical bezel. So as you can see, we have the top of it facing away from us, so we're going to flip this over, and that's the top back. So we got our 2 wood strips here. We want to make sure, again, the clean edge is going against the edge of the monitor cutout, and the same thing with the other wood strip that's going on the top. Now, again, the wood strip with the notches cut out is going to go towards the top. And just to show you what I'm talking about here, basically we want to line it up, because those notches, the notches are there so it doesn't cover up those screw holes that will hold the marquee in place when we put this back in the cabinet. So as long as those notches are not covering those holes and doesn't impede those holes, then we're good to go with the with that wood strip being there. So so again, we're just going to line up the clean edge to the monitor cutout, and do that for the bottom, and the same for the top. And then once we got an idea where we're going to put it, then we're going to take our wood glue here, and we're just going to put a generous amount on here. And once we get it on there, then again, like I said, we're going to line it back up again and just kind of push it in place. And again, we want it flush with that we want that clean edge flush with the monitor cutout edge as well. But because those lines may not be cut straight, you may have to adjust it a little bit, so it may not be as flush with it because it's not a straight line cut. But just try to get it so it doesn't protrude out of the monitor outline. So once you do that, then we're going to take the other strip and do the same thing and kind of adjust it. And then once we get that kind of lined up and adjusted again, making sure that's flush with the monitor outline there, then we can grab our clamps and we can start clamping it down. Okay, so we're just taking our clamps here, and we'll start at the top here. We're going to use 3 clamps for the top, 3 clamps for the bottom. Put a clamp to the left, 1 to the middle, and 1 to the right. So I just put the clamp in on the left, and then we're going to put the clamp in on the right. Just make sure when you start clamping it down, again, you may have to readjust the wood strip. So again, that's flush with that horizontal outline edge. And then we'll just put the middle one in here. And don't worry, the wood glue that's leaking out, don't worry about that. We're going to clean that up here in a minute, but we're also, once the wood glue dries, we'll take some sandpaper or sandpaper block and kind of sand it down a little bit so that there's no glue there's no excess glue. And so now we got the top done. Now we'll move on to the bottom and clamp that down. Okay, so once we got that clamped down, that's it. And then we just have to wait about 2 hours for the wood glue to dry or cure. I'm just going to take you can take a rag and clean up the excess wood glue that's seeping out from the edges. But again, we're just going to wait about 2 hours and then come back to this and unclamp it. Okay, so 2 hours have gone by and we can start taking off these clamps one by one. Okay, and once we take the final clamp off, we can move these clamps over to the side. And as we can see, we have our wood strips on here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our sanding block, and on the top and the bottom there, we're just going to sand it a little bit just to remove any excess glue that was there. And if there's like big clumps of glue, you can use a razor blade, or I just generally use my fingers to pick off the glue and just sand it, and just do the same thing on the other side. And once we do that, that's it, and we can move on. Okay, now we're moving on to sub-step B, which is we're going to line up the poster board on the bezel. Now, we already did this essentially in step 4, sub-step K, but we're doing it again just in case. Basically just making one final check to make sure that the poster board is cut correctly the way you want it, and to adjust that LCD panel to make sure it's straight before you actually screw it down to the back of the LCD the wood bezel. So what you're going to need in this case, you're going to need your poster board outline that you cut in step 4, sub-step I. You're going to need a wood bezel that's cut for the 19-inch LCD panel that you cut in step 4, sub-step J. And then finally, you're going to need your 19-inch LCD panel with the brackets that you put on in step 4, sub-step F. Okay, so this is a diagram of or picture of what the front of the bezel will look like when you put the monitor on there to test with. So before we put our poster board on there, you'll notice that the monitor, you put it in, and it has a silver outline around it, around the perimeter. And that's what we're trying to kind of cover up with the poster board. So after we put the poster board on there and line it up with the screw holes for the original Arcade1UP acrylic bezel, those same screw holes. So you'll see something like you see on the right. And you'll notice that even when you have it applied, some of the silver is still going to show, that silver perimeter, and that's fine, because what we're going to be doing later is we'll put friction tape on that, so that will cover up those that silver perimeter, so that everything will look black. So just again, keep in mind that we're just making sure in this part that the monitor looks straight and that the poster board covers most of the silver around the perimeter of the monitor. Okay, so we got our wood bezel here, our 19-inch bezel, just making sure that the top is pointing away from you. We're just going to put our 19-inch monitor in here and make sure the LVDS port is pointing to the left and not the right. Just get used to that. It's not going to matter right now because we're just testing, make sure everything's in place, but just get used to making sure that's on the left. Then we're just going to flip this over, and then we're going to start adjusting the monitor to make sure it fits right. Now, because this is a little loose, we just want to make sure we have it positioned right and everything looks straight. So just kind of eyeball it to make sure, because then once we screw it in the back, just kind of remember how you had it positioned, so that everything's straight and everything. And you may have little gaps here, and that's fine, because once we do the friction tape, that'll be covered up. But what we're going to do is we're going to take our poster board and we're going to flip it around, and we're just going to line those up with our the original bezel, the whole screw holes that held the Arcade1UP stock acrylic bezel in place. And we're just going to line up those holes here, and just to see how it looks like. Now, we did this in a previous step as well, but we're just doing it again just to make sure everything looks right. So again, we're just lining up the holes. We don't have to hold it down or anything. We're just eyeballing it, because again, now we're making sure that the monitor is straight before we screw it on, and we want to make sure that the poster board looks okay when it's placed. So at this point, again, if you decide you want to recut the poster board, that's fine. You can do that here before we screw it in place. It looks okay to me, and those silver borders will be covered with friction tape, so those will be black out once we get to that step. So everything looks good to me here. Again, if it doesn't look good to you, you can move this LCD, or you can recut the poster board, but everything looks good, and we're going to move on. Okay, now we're moving on to sub-step C in our 19-inch vertical mod, and that's to screw the LCD panel to the back of the bezel. So what you're going to need here is you're going to need the wood bezel that you cut for the 19-inch LCD panel with the wood strips that you attached in sub-step A. You're going to need your 19-inch LCD panel with the brackets that you attached in step 4, sub-step F. You're going to need a power drill with a 1/8-inch drill bit. This can be optional, but I use the power drill to drill my pilot holes. You can just use, you may be able to get away with the electronic screwdriver to drill, just to put the screws in without drilling pilot holes, but I like to drill the pilot holes. Then you're going to need 8 number 6 1/2-inch wood screws. And then finally, you're going to need 1 Phillips head screwdriver. And again, you can use a power screwdriver or your power drill with a bit to screw these screws in, but I prefer to use a Phillips head screwdriver. Okay, so if you look at the diagram of this, this is the back of the vertical bezel, and we're going to put the LCD panel in the back here. So when you set this up, you're going to set it down on the back, and if you look at where the LVDS port is, it's pointing to the left. So you want to make sure that it is going to the left. Otherwise, if it's on the right side, the image when you plug up the Arcade1UP is going to be upside down. So make sure that the LVDS port is to the left. But once you get it adjusted and in place, then what we're going to do is on each of the brackets, there's 3 screw holes. we're going to put screws in the left and the right of each bracket. We're not going to screw in the middle one, just the ones on the left and the right. And we're going to drill our pilot holes, and then we're going to use number 6 half-inch screws to screw the panel down to the bezel. Okay, so we got the back of the wood bezel again the top facing away from you. And so we're going to place the LCD panel back in here again. And again, that LVDS port, make sure it is to the left. If it's to the right, then your image is going to be upside down. So when we plug it up to the Arcade1UP PCB. So again, we're just lining this up here. Make sure that the brackets line up on the wood strips that we put on there, so that they'll hold the screws in place. And basically, we're gonna do 2 pilot holes for each bracket, one to the left, one to the right. And we don't have to do the middle one. So we're going to take our drill and with our 1/8 inch drill bit, and we're just going to start screwing pilot holes. And we're going to do that for all the brackets for the left and the right of the bracket. Okay, and once we got our final pilot hole drilled, we can wipe away that excess sawdust or MDF dust, whatever you want to call it. And now we're going to take our we're going to get our number 6 half-inch screws, and we're going to take 8 of those, and we're going to screw those in the pilot holes that we just drilled. So again, taking the screw out, take a few out there, and then we're just take each screw. We're going to take our Phillips head screwdriver, and we're going to screw all those we're going to screw those screws in into the pilot holes we just drilled. Okay, we're screwing down our final screw, and once we do, that's it. It should be held down, and we're just going to pick it up. Like I said, we're just going to kind of shake it a little bit, just to make, I do it anyway, just to make sure everything's in place. And then I just flip it over and kind of make sure that the edges are flush, make sure it's not protruding out, because if it is, it's going to bend the plexiglass that we put on later. So once you confirm all that, that's it. It's secure, and we can move on. Okay, so now we're going to move to sub-step D, which is we're going to apply the friction tape. The friction tape is applied to the perimeter of the LCD monitor. So the LCD monitor has this silver outline around it. And basically what we want to prevent from happening is if the poster board and the bat, isn't completely covering up the that silver outline, it's going to show through the plexiglass. So what we do is we put black friction tape on there around the perimeter of the that silver outline, so that if the poster board doesn't cover up those silver outlines all the way, then it's going to show black and match the poster board outline, which is black. So for this step, what we need is the wood bezel with the 19-inch LCD panel attached. We need our roll of black friction tape, and we need we possibly may need a utility knife. Now, friction tape is usually made of cloth, so you can tear it pretty easily, but in some cases, if it doesn't tear off easily, you need a utility knife or a pair of scissors, if you have them as well, to cut the tape to the length you need it. Okay, so in this diagram, we're about to show you how to apply the friction tape, and the diagram shows what it looks like before and after. So in the before picture, this is before we put the friction tape on. As you can see, the monitor, it has a silver outline around the perimeter of the monitor, and that's what we're going to be covering up in the friction tape. So if you look at the picture on to the right, which is after the friction tape is applied, you'll notice that once we put the tape on, we're covering anything that's silver around that perimeter. And this is so when we put the poster board on there and the actual plexiglass, if anything is, if it's not cut right or anything like that, since it's black, only the black tape will show and not the silver, and it will blend in with the black background of the poster board. Okay, so now we're just going to take our friction tape. We've got our monitor. This is the front of it. So we're going to take our friction tape, and we're just going to take strips off. Just kind of take off a strip that measures the length of what we're covering. And we're going to cover the perimeter of the monitor, so we're basically covering up that silver outline and covering it black, so that when we put our poster board on, that none of that silver is exposed. It's just going to look black. So again, just peel out, just take a strip off, kind of line it up with the silver perimeter, and then once you got it lined up, just use your hand to put it in place. And then we're just going to do the same thing for the rest of the perimeter of the monitor. Okay, so now I'm applying the final strip here. Again, we're just covering up the silver part. We're not trying to touch the monitor, so we just want to try to line it up as best as we can, and then just apply the tape once it's lined up, and that's it. And we can move on to the next sub-step. Okay, for our next sub-step, which is sub-step E for our 19-inch vertical mod, we're going to be adding the electronic components to the electronic backboard. So the parts you're going to need for this, you're going to need your 17-inch electronic back panel that you cut in step 4, sub-step B. You're going to need a power drill with a 1/8 inch drill bit to drill your pilot holes. You're going to need 8 machine screws from your PCB feet kit. You're going to need the inverter board with PCB feet attached. You're going to need your LVDS cable with ground cable attached. You're going to need your Arcade1UP PCB with the metal case with the PCB feet attached, which was done in step 4, sub-step C. And you're going to need your LCD controller board and LCD controller board control panel with the PCB feet attached, which was done in step 4, sub-step C as well. Now, the controller board and the controller board control panel are optional if you didn't purchase these. If you just purchased the inverter board and you're just doing this to get the Arcade1UP PCB working, that's fine, because that's what this video is all about, getting a monitor hooked up to your Arcade1UP PCB. However, if you want to purchase the controller board and put it on there in case later on you want to upgrade to a PC or a Raspberry Pi, then you can put the LCD controller board on there now if you purchased it, which is the case that I did, and that's why I'm putting it on there. And that way, even when you decide to move to a PC or a Pi, you just move the cables from the Arcade1UP PCB over to the LCD controller board, and that monitor will work with a PC or a Pi. You also may need a jigsaw with a wood blade or a wood saw. This is possible because before we actually put the components on here, we're going to line up the electronic backboard onto the back of the wood bezel to line it up to make sure everything fits, because we don't want to block the screw holes there on the back, on the top of the bezel, because those screw holes are used to hold the bezel into the Arcade1UP marquee. So we just want to make sure that that isn't blocked. And if it is blocked, then we're going to have to make some cuts to the wood to accommodate so that the screw holes aren't obstructed. And then you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver. And it's probably best to use the Phillips head screwdriver and not use a power drill or an electronic screwdriver to screw these in, because these are machine screws, and I think you'll have to pre-drill the make pilot holes before you screw these in. And then finally, you're going to need a metallic ruler or speed square, or the ruler that you purchased. And then finally, you're going to need a black Sharpie. Okay, so this is a diagram of what the electronic backboard for the 19-inch vertical mod is going to look like. So as you can see by the legend and the diagram, so going from bottom to the top, this is probably the best way to put the components arranged for this particular LCD monitor or LCD panel that we're using. Now each one is going to be, each LCD panel is going to be different, but most LCD panels are going to follow this order. So starting from the bottom to the top, so at the bottom we're going to put the inverter board. Then above that to the left is going to be the Arcade1UP PCB. To the right of that is going to be the LCD controller board, and above that is going to be the LCD controller board control panel. So we're going to assemble it in this order, and also we're going to make our lines for our borders. You'll notice that coming from the top to the bottom and bottom to the top, there's a 1 1/4 inch border that we're going to make. This is going to be the border that the electronic components will not cross, and this gives us room so we can attach the panel to the back of the bezel when we're done. Okay, so before we actually start attaching the components to the backboard, we just want to make sure that the backboard doesn't impede anything on the back of our monitor or our bezel. So the two things we're looking for not to be blocked are the cabinet brackets. These should be outlined, but I didn't outline them on mine because I forgot to. And then the two holes on the top, which when put in the Arcade1UP, screws into the back of the bezel. So basically we just want to line this up here, and nothing's being impeded, so we're good to go. And now we can actually add the electrical components to the backboard. Okay, so now we're gonna measure out our borders on the left and the right here, and these are the borders that that we're making so that we know where to put the electronic components so that they don't interfere when we're going to screw this down on the back of the bezel. So from left to right, we're going to measure 1 1/4 of an inch, and then from same thing from right to left, we're going to measure 1 1/4 of an inch. And then we're going to do the same thing, bring the ruler down to the bottom, and again make the same measurements, 1 1/4 of an inch from left to right, and 1 1/4 inch from right to left. And then what I use is my speed square to complete the line, but you can use a ruler. And just line up your ruler or your speed square to the two notches that you just made on each side, and go ahead and draw your straight line. Now this is the border to where everything in between those borders is where all the electronic components are going to go. They're not going to go outside the border. So now we can start adding components to the backboard itself. Okay, so now we can start, again, we're going to start applying the electronic components to the backboard. So first off, we're going to flip this in a vertical orientation, and we're going to work from the bottom up. So the first thing we're going to attach is the inverter board. Just make sure that the power cable is pointing up and not down. And then we're going to, the legs, the PCB legs, we're going to rotate them about 45 degrees so that the legs will set on the wood. Otherwise they would go off the wood panel. And then we're going to take our drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit and go on each side of each foot and drill a hole, and then take our machine screw and put it in there and screw that down, and then we'll do the same thing over on the right side as well once we're done. Okay, so once we get our second screw in there, now we got our inverter board on the backboard. And the next step is to get the Arcade1UP PCB on there. Now, before we attach this on here, we're going to add our cables to this. So we're going to get our LVDS cable, and we're going to orient the board this way. If you look on the cable, you'll see a mark, a white mark or a red mark. This indicates pin 1, and in the orientation that we have the PCB here, pin 1 is on the left. So we want to line up wherever the white dot is with pin 1, which is to the left on the PCB. So once we confirm that, then we're just going to put that in place. Now we're going to put the ground cable in place. So we're going to take one of the screws out of the PCB, and then we're going to screw down the cable. Okay, so once you get that screw out, we're going to thread it into the ground cable in the hole there, and then we're going to screw that back down to the PCB. So we're just going to take our Phillips head screwdriver and screw it down. And then once we get that screwed down, we're going to take our inverter power cable, and we're also going to plug that into the Arcade1UP PCB. So this only plugs in one way, so once you get that plugged in, that's it. And now we can screw this down to the backboard. So make sure the ribbon cable is pointing outside of the board, and the same thing with the LVDS cable. Just make sure they're pointing, to the left of the board. They're not pointing in the board. And we're going to put it as close to the edge as possible. And then once we got it where we want, then we're going to take our power drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit, and we're going to drill our pilot hole, and then we're going to take our machine screw and screw that down. And once we do that, we're going to do the same thing on the other side as well. And also note that it is a tight space to fit in there, so if you do have to take off the inverter board, go ahead to screw it down. But you know, you shouldn't have a problem once you get the pilot hole getting that screwed in. Okay, and we're getting our we just screwed in our final screw there, so the Arcade1UP PCB is secure. So now we're going to screw in our the LCD controller board. Again, if you decided not to do this part, whereas you're just using the Arcade1UP PCB and not the LCD controller board, you don't have to do this part. But again, I'm screwing it in because I may want to do this. May want to hook up a PC or a Pi later on. Now you see I put the control panel cable underneath there, underneath the board. That's just to keep it out of the way. And I do it now, or else I'll have to, you know, take the whole thing off again and do it. But in order to get these screws into the board, I'm going to take off the Arcade1UP PCB case that's on the top of these the PCB feet. This will just give me a little bit of room to screw down that LCD controller board. So I'm just going to take that off, and now that I got a little bit more room to work with, we're going to start in the back here. And again, we're only doing 2 holes here. We're doing the 2. We're only going to screw in the 2 back feet. The 2 feet in the middle we're not going to screw in because it's just too hard to get to. But all we have to do is screw these in. So we're going to screw this one in, and then we'll screw in the next one after we get this one in. Okay, so we're screwed down the second PCB foot on there, and the LCD control board's in place. Now we're going to put back the Arcade1UP PCB back on its feet. So we're going to take those 2 little screws, and a little difficult to get on there, but we're just going to screw those back onto the feet. Okay, and now that we got the Arcade1UP PCB screwed back on there, now we can put the LCD controller board control panel on there. Just make sure we get enough slack on the cable there, and we'll put that on the edge there. And again, we're going to get our power drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit, start the pilot hole, and then get our machine screw and screw that down. And once we get that screwed down, we'll repeat it on the other one on the other side. And once we get that screwed down, that's it. Our control, we got our all our components on our backboard, and we're ready to put this on the back of our bezel and our LCD. So now we're moving on to sub-step F, which is we're going to attach the electronic back panel to the back of the bezel. So what you're going to need for this, you're going to need your 17-inch electronic back panel with the electronic components attached. You're going to need your power drill with a 1/8 inch drill bit to drill your pilot holes. You're going to need 4 number 1-inch wood screws. And then finally, you're going to need your Phillips head screwdriver. And again, you can use, if you have a power drill with the correct bit, or if you have an electronic screwdriver, you can use that to screw in the screws once you drill the pilot holes. But I just prefer to use a Phillips head screwdriver. And once we finish attaching the backboard to the back of the bezel, then we'll plug in the LCD lamps into the inverter board and plug the LVDS cable into the back of the LCD panel. Okay, so here's a picture of the back of the bezel with the 19-inch LCD panel installed in the vertical format. So what we're going to do is just pretty much attach the electronic back panel to the back of the bezel. So essentially, you're going to line up the electronic panel that you cut and put the electronic components on. You're just going to center that onto the wood strips that we put on there, and then we're going to drill 4 pilot holes. And once we get those pilot holes drilled, then we're going to drill our we're going to use our number 6 1-inch screws and screw those down so that to hold that panel in place. And then once we do that, we'll plug up our lamp cables and plug in the the LVDS cable to the LVDS port on the back of the monitor. Okay, so this is the back of the bezel again, and again the top is facing away from us. So before we attach this on here, we're going to put the LVDS cable, we're going to plug that in first. And the reason we're going to plug that in is because once we get the panel on there, it's going to be it's going to be hard to get it in there because it's going to be a tight fit to get our hand in there and get the cable in there. So we're going to do that now. So again, you got two ends at the end of there that you press together, and then once you line it up, just plug it in and press in to get a tight fit. Now it should only go one way, and you don't want to force it in, but you just want to make sure that you get it in there and it's tight in there. So once it's in there, then we're going to take the panel and we're going to set it, line it up, make sure that the again the ribbon cable and of course the LVDS cable is to the left, which you already do have that because we already have it plugged into the monitor. So we're going to line that up on the bottom there, and we're going to drill our pilot holes. Now make sure when you drill your pilot holes, it has to go through the electronic back panel, it has to go through the wood strip, and it has to go through the MDF. It doesn't have to go all the way through, but the MDF, but it has to go through enough so we can screw in our 1-inch screws. So taking our drill and our 1/8 inch drill bit, we're going to start drilling our pilot hole, one on the left, or one on the right, and then one on the left. And then once we get those pilot holes drilled, we're going to take our number 6 1-inch screw. We're going to get 2 of them, and then we're going to just start one. We're going to stick them both into the one each into the pilot hole, and using our Phillips head screwdriver, we're going to screw the screws in place. Now, of course, if you want to use your power drill to screw these in, or if you have a power screwdriver, you can do that. I'm just using my Phillips head screwdriver, and once we get this screwed in, we'll screw in the second one. Okay, so now we got that screwed in place. Now we're going to rotate it 90 degrees, or 180 degrees, I should say, and we're going to drill another 2 drill pilot holes on the other side. So again, we're going to drill 1 pilot hole on the right, 1 pilot hole on the left, and once we do that, again, we're going to take our number 6 1-inch screws, and we're going to just stick those in the pilot holes we just drilled, and then we're going to take our Phillips head screwdriver and screw it down, and we're going to do it on the right side and repeat it on the left side. Okay, and once we get that final screw in, we're done as far as getting the panel on there. And we've already plugged in our LVDS cable, so we just need to plug in our lamp cables. And as you can see here, we have these ones have clips on the top of them, so the clip faces upward, and we're just going to go ahead and plug those in. Okay, so we're just going to plug in each clip on the left side and go over to the right side and do the same thing. Get those plugged in, and once those are plugged in, that's it. The back panel is attached, all the cables are plugged in. What I do as far as these loose cables, I kind of just put them underneath the Arcade1UP PCB, and or you can clean them up however you want to, and that's it. The electronic backboard is attached, and we can move to the next step. Okay, so now we're moving on to sub-step F, which is applying the poster board and plexiglass to the bezel. So for this step, you're going to need the wood bezel with the 19-inch LCD panel attached. You're going to need your poster board bezel, which you cut in step 4, sub-step I. You're going to need a plexiglass bezel with the drilled holes that you drilled in step 4, sub-step H. And you're going to need the 4 original screws that held in the Arcade1UP acrylic panel, because we're going to reuse those screws again, and you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver to screw those screws in. Now it's suggested that you don't use a power drill or a power screwdriver. That may be too much torque and you may damage the plexiglass. It's best just to use your regular Phillips head screwdriver to screw these screws in. Also, with the back panel attached to the back, when you put the panel on a table to put the plexiglass and the poster board on there, it's not going to lie flat. because of the backboard that's on there. So if you want it to lie flat, I suggest you take the back panel off by removing the 4 screws, and then put the poster board and the plexiglass on there. And then once that's on there, then put the backboard back on there, or else it's not going to be steady when you put it on there. But you're only putting in 4 screws anyway, so it's not a major deal that it has to be flat. And in my case, when I showed the video, I didn't take off the back panel. I just put on the poster board and plexiglass. But if you want to take off that backboard to make it flat, you're more than welcome to do so. So if you look at the diagram here, we have a before and after picture of, before the poster board and plexiglass is applied, and then the after. So the before just shows you what it looks like before we apply anything. And as you see the black outline, which is the friction tape we put on in a previously. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the poster board and line those holes up on the poster board with the holes where the original Arcade1UP acrylic bezel went. And then we're going to peel off the back film off the plexiglass, line that up with the holes on the poster board and the Arcade1UP original acrylic bezel. And then we're going to screw it down with the original screws from the Arcade1UP Star acrylic bezel. We're going to reuse those 4 screws. And then once those screws are down and the bezel and the plexi are in place, then we'll peel off the film off the top of the new plexi that we just put in. Okay, so we got the front of the monitor on here. And again, the top is facing away from us. So first off, we're going to line up our poster board, and then we're going to put our plexi on top of that. So we want to take our plexiglass. We've got it marked top front. We want to take the back film off of the back, and we want to peel that off because that's going to go on to the back of the. That's going to go on top of the poster board. And then also what we want to do is once we do that, we want to flip it over. We want to try not to touch it if we can, but we're going to flip it over. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to peel off the 4 corners to peel off the film around the screw holes, and that way we can screw it down without taking the whole thing off. So we're just going to peel off each corner. Okay, so we got our 4 corners peeled. So basically we have our wood bezel, we have our poster board hole lined up with the hole on the wood bezel, and then we have the plexiglass lined up with the hole that's on the poster board, which is lined up on the wood bezel. So once we have that lined up, we're just going to take our 4 screws from the original Arcade1UP acrylic bezel, the screws that held that in place, and we're just going to replace those screws. So we already did it in the top corner. We're going to do it in the lower corner here, and we're going to repeat that on the other 2 on the other side as well. Okay, so once we get that final screw in place, that's it. Then we can we're going to peel off the rest of the film. Now, if you want to wait on this, you can. You can actually wait before peeling off the film. You can wait until it's actually in your Arcade1UP. But we're peeling it off because we want to test the monitor to make sure it does come up. So it's going to probably be hard to see that with the film. And also you can see here, I made a little mistake there. The looks like the friction tape curled up a little bit on the top, so I have to undo it anyway. But if you decide you want to wait, that's fine to take off the film. But other than that, we have everything on there. Everything looks straight other than that little curl up. And now we can actually test the monitor to make sure it works. Okay, so the final sub-step in this 19-inch vertical mod is sub-step G, and that's testing the LCD panel. Now we want to test the panel before we put it in the Arcade1UP cabinet to fix any issues that may occur, because if we were to put this in the Arcade1UP cabinet, get everything secure, and then test it, then we'd have to take everything back apart again. So it's best just to test it now and fix any problems that occur now. So the parts you're going to need your Arcade1UP bezel with the LCD panel in it. You're going to need your Arcade1UP control panel, and you're also going to need your Arcade1UP power supply to power it. Okay, so we're going to test the monitor now. I got it hooked up to a Galago control panel. Of course, that's because that's what the PCB I'm using. And I'm just showing you that I got the ribbon cable plugged in and the 12 volt power supply. Now in this video, it's going to show that it's not going to work. The screen's going to go white. So off camera, I got to troubleshoot and figure out what I did wrong, and that means checking our LVDS cables and the such to see what exactly has gone wrong, and I'll do that off camera. Okay, so after some troubleshooting, it turned out that the LVDS port on the back of my 19-inch LCD panel was bad. So I had to change out to a new 19-inch LCD panel that I had. And that's what that is. This is back here, so you can see my ribbon cable and 12 volt power supply plugged into the PCB. And when I turn it on this time, it will come up. And once you confirm that your panel comes up, that's it for the assembly, and we're ready to put this back into the Arcade1UP cabinet. So that means you can proceed to step 6 to accomplish that task. Just look in the description to find the time index of where to start on step 6. Okay, so now that we completed step 5 and we've got our LCD panel all assembled, we're ready to follow step 6, which is to install the bezel back into the Arcade1UP cabinet. Now the parts needed for this are, you're going to need your Arcade1UP cabinet, of course. You're going to need your new bezel with the LCD panel electronic backboard attached. And then you're going to need all the parts that you took out of the Arcade1UP, which would include the control panel, the H panel, and the Arcade1UP marquee. And also you're going to need your set of screws you took out of the Arcade1UP, including those screws that held in the control panel, the marquee, bezel, etc. As we, of course, we got to put those screws back in there. And then finally, you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver. Again, you can also use a power drill with the right bit, or you can use a power screwdriver to screw down these screws. I just decided to use just a regular Phillips head screwdriver, but what you use is up to you to screw the screws down. And I also put on here that you may need a power drill with a 1/8 inch drill bit, and this is for the bezel when you put it back in on those 4 cabinet brackets. So there's 8 screws that hold the bezel into the cabinet brackets in the back. What I've come to find out sometimes is when you put the panel back in, sometimes those holes don't line up correctly. So you'll have to possibly re-drill some pilot holes for those in the back. You know, I'll show you in the video when you get to it what I'm talking about. But so you may have to re-drill again those pilot holes so that the screws will go into more easily. As screwing those screws back into the cabinet brackets is probably the hardest part of this whole thing. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to screw down this back panel back in. Not all the way. We're just going to screw in enough to where it just holds it in place. So just put the screw in and just kind of use your finger to kind of screw it in so that it's just holding it in place so it doesn't slip around. Okay, so the next step is to put the LCD panel or bezel back in. So we're going to take our LCD panel bezel, and you got your 2 crevices there. You're going to put it in one crevice, and then you're going to pull a little bit on the side panel and kind of push it in and get that other side of the panel into the crevice to kind of hold it in. Now if it doesn't go all the way in, that's fine. We'll screw it down once we get the marquee in. Okay, so now we're ready to put the marquee in. So just on one side, line up the 2 wood dowels and stick it in there, then pull a little bit on the other side and slide in the other 2 wood dowels. Just try not to pull too hard, or else you may pull out the LCD panel. Okay, so now we're going to screw one side of the marquee down. So I usually do the left side first, but you can do the right side if you want to, doesn't matter. Just go ahead and take one of your screws, put it in the screw hole, make sure it connects with the marquee, and then you just use your Phillips head screwdriver to screw it down. You're only going to do this on one side for right now. You're not going to do the second side at this moment. Okay, so now we're going to screw the bezel to the marquee. Now, some people don't do this step. Some people just leave this alone and don't screw it in. I choose to screw it in, but you can do whatever you want to. You don't necessarily have to screw it down to the marquee. But anyway, if you decide to do so, just get your 2 screws that you had previously. Just line them up and take your Phillips head screwdriver and go ahead and put the 2 screws in the holes and screw it down to the marquee. Okay, now we're going to put the H panel back in. So we have to line this up on the 2 crevices on one side of the panel, and then we also have to line it up on the crevice on the marquee. So I apologize if my camera's a little going in and out of the picture, but basically I try to get the panel on one side of the crevice and then pull a little bit on the side that isn't screwed down, and line up the other side of the crevice, and then make sure that the crevice is inside the the marquee crevice as well. And then it will lock. If it's a little loose, that's fine. When we put the final screws in, it will lock it in place. Okay, with the H panel in place, we can go ahead and put the final screw into the marquee. So just take your screw, put it in the hole, and use your Phillips head screwdriver to screw it down. And then once you get that screwed down, we're going to screw down this other screw that we put in prior. So we're going to fully screw that one down as well. Okay, so for me, this is probably the most difficult part, and it's getting these screws back into the cabinet brackets on the back of the bezel. Even though that they're lined up, you'll see here when I try to put this in, the screw's going to go all over the place and drop and everything else. So that's why probably a screwdriver with a magnetic tip will probably be helpful here, which I didn't have. Also, you may find that the screw holes that were on the bezel don't necessarily line up, so you may have to drill new pilot holes so those screws will fit. You can get a power drill with your 1/8 inch drill bit if you need to drill new pilot holes to make it easier. But we're gonna put the 8 screws back in 2 for each cabinet bracket. And once we get that final screw in, now the bezel is connected to the brackets. Okay, now we're going to put the control panel back in. So we're going to take our ribbon cable that's on the other side, and we're going to plug that into the control panel. It only plugs in one way, so don't force it in. And once we get that ribbon cable plugged in, then we're going to set the control panel back in. Then we're going to take our 4 screws that hold down the control panel, and we're just going to insert those into the holes. And once we get all those inserted, then we will go ahead and use our Phillips head screwdriver to start screwing them down. You can start anywhere you want, just screw them down and make sure they're tightened in place. And once we get that final screw down, the control panel is locked in place. Okay, so now we're going to plug the power and reattach the back panel to the back of the Arcade1UP cabinet. So I'm not sure how other cabinets are, like Gen 2 or Gen 3, but on the Gen 1s you have this little extension cable that plugs into the back of the PCB, and then the other end plugs into the cable that's in the panel. So this is the 12-volt AC adapter, and that slips into a hole on the back of the panel, and that's where we're going to plug in that the other part of that power extension cable. Okay, and just plug in the extension cable into the 12-volt power supply that's coming out of the panel. We're not going to screw in the panel just yet. We're going to power on the monitor to make sure that it does come up before we screw this on. So we're going to turn on the display now and make sure it does come up. I'm going to show you all 4 of the different ones. The first one here is the 17-inch mod, and as you can see, it's booting up just fine. And then we're going to show you the 19-inch vertical mod, the 17-inch horizontal mod, and the 19-inch horizontal mod all booting up. Now you'll see that there's no sound. That's because I had to redo the audio on these. But do keep in mind that there is sound on this as well, so everything's working properly on the 17-inch. And then we move on to the 19-inch vertical mod. Turn it on, and this is what that looks like. As you can see, everything's coming up just fine on that. And then we move on to the 17-inch horizontal mod. Turn on the power. As you can see, that's coming up just fine. And finally, the 19-inch horizontal mod will power it on. And it should power up. Now, whatever mod that you decide to do, whether it be the 17-inch or 19-inch vertical or 19-inch horizontal, if power doesn't come up, if you see a white screen, if you see a flashing test pattern with different colors, then you'd have to go back and check your cable connections on the PCB or the LVDS cable. But if everything's working properly, everything's powering up and everything plays right, then we're almost done. We just have to put the back panel back on the back of the Arcade1UP cabinet to complete. Okay, so now that we've tested the LCD panel, make sure everything came up, we can put the back panel back on. So just slide it into the crevice that it needs to go into, and screw down your 2 screws with your Phillips head screwdriver. Sorry, the camera's cut off a little bit here, but it's very simple. Put the screw in and screw it down, and then do that for the other side as well. And once you get that final screw screwed down, that's it. Congratulations, you have installed your LCD panel and everything is good to go. So if you're just using this mod to connect it up to your Arcade1UP PCB, which is the whole purpose of this video, you're pretty much done. However, as you've seen in the video, I did put an LCD controller board in here as well. Now, I put an LCD controller board in there just to see in case later on I want to put a PC in here, or if I want to put a Raspberry Pi in here. So I put the LCD controller board in there so that I can easily just take the cables that are plugged into the Arcade1UP PCB and plug them into the LCD controller board. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do right now. And if you're going to use this, if you're not going to use this for an Arcade1UP PCB and you're just going to use it for the LCD controller board, then complete this step and then you can use your PC or Pi with this. So essentially what you're going to need as far as parts go, of course you're going to need a new bezel with the LCD panel and electronic backboard, and you're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver. So in this instance, I've taken the panel out of the Arcade1UP cabinet again, but you do not have to do that. I just did this for ease of use, but you could actually do this with it inside. It's just a matter of preference. But anyway, so basically we're just going to move the cables over from the Arcade1UP PCB to the LCD controller board. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to unscrew the Arcade1UP PCB casing from the PCB feet. So we're just going to take our Phillips head screwdriver and take off those 2 screws. And once we get those 2 screws off, we're going to flip it over. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take off that ground cable on the PCB. So we're going to unscrew this screw here and get that off. Okay, so once we unscrew that out, we're going to take it out from the ground cable thread there, and we're just going to put that screw back onto the PCB so that we don't lose it. And then once we get that back on, next thing we're going to unplug is the inverter power cable, and then we're going to unplug the LVDS cable from the PCB. Now this can be stuck on there a little bit. Just pull out, don't you should just be able to pull on it and it'll unplug. Just make sure you don't pull on it too hard to where you pull out all the cables. And then once we get that unplugged, we're just going to put the PCB back on here, just so I don't lose it and I know what it is. Now, if you're not going to use the PCB anymore, of course, you could just leave it off and then, do what you want to do with it, whether it's sell it or whatever you're going to do. But I just put it back on here so I don't lose it. So once we get that back on there, then we can attach the cables onto the LCD controller board. So the first thing we'll do is we'll attach the ground cable. So we'll take off one of the screws off the one of the PCB legs. I usually do the one to the right, and we'll just unscrew that. And then once we do, we'll thread that into the ground cable and then screw that back onto the PCB leg. And then once we do that, then we'll connect the LVDS cable to the controller board. Now keep in mind, now remember, you have your white dot which indicates, or red dot which indicates pin 1. Now in the orientation that the LCD controller is showing here, pin 1 would be to the left. So make sure that white dot lines up with that. And then once you confirm that, just go ahead and make sure it's on all the pins and push it down. And then plug in your power for your inverter board. That'll be over to the left here, and that only plugs in one way. And those are the cables that you need to plug in, and then just hide your cables however you want to, and that's it. And we got the cables all put over to the LCD controller board. Okay, now that I have the I have my LCD panel back into the cabinet, if you took it out of the cabinet. So I'm just going to unplug the power from the PCB over to the LCD controller board, and I have the power plugged in already, so you see the light on. And then I'm going to plug in whatever connection I'm going to use. I'm using a HDMI for my computer, so I plug that in, and we can move on to powering on the computer. Okay, so I apologize for the different camera view. I had to switch over to my phone camera as my other camera, something happened to it. But regardless, we've got the PC hooked up. We're not going to use the power on the control panel. We're going to have to use the power on the computer. So we're just going to turn it on, and it should boot up. And there you go. Now again, as I stated, you can't use the power on the control panel, nor can you use the volume or the buttons, because we don't have anything hooked up to the PC as far as that goes. This only just gets the monitor to work with your computer or Pi. Any other components, encoders and stuff, you'll have to set up as well as the power buttons and whatnot to work. Okay, so that concludes the how to install a 17 or 19 inch LCD panel to an Arcade1UP Generation 1 or 2 cabinet and connecting it to directly to Arcade1UP PCB. And I realize this video series is long. I mean, it's total of like about 5 hours of video footage. Of course, you didn't have to watch every single piece of that video. You just need to fast forward to the parts that you need to go to. But my whole goal of this video was to make the video for as an introduction, to make sure it was detailed, to make sure that a person could who doesn't really have any modding skills could watch this video and basically follow the steps and do this on their own. And I hope I've accomplished that. With that said, I hope you enjoy your cabinet, and thanks for watching.